Hey there, tonight we're diving into the grimy ledger of a Roman slave trader's daily grind. What you're about to discover is that their life was just as shackled by bureaucracy and deception as those they sold. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. If you ever thought a career in sales had its downsides, let me introduce you to the glamorous, yet utterly soul-sucking world of Roman slave trading. You're not just haggling over the latest gadget here. You're part of an economic juggernaut that makes the stock market look like a lemonade stand. The Roman Empire, as you might know, was a vast, sprawling entity, and at its heart was a workforce that didn't clock out at 5, because a solid 10% of the population were slaves. That's right, 1 in 10 people were on the wrong side of freedom, shackled to the whims of their Roman overlords. Now, before you romanticize the whole civilizing mission, spiel that Rome loved to broadcast, let's cut to the chase. It was about as civilizing as a bull in a china shop. The empire wasn't spreading enlightenment, it was spreading its empire. Profit, not progress, was the name of the game. The myth of Rome's benevolent hand guiding the less fortunate into the light of civilization. Total PR fluff. In reality, it was more about padding the Senate's pockets and keeping the empire's economic engine running smoothly. And speaking of engines, let's talk logistics. The Roman slave trade wasn't a local farmer's market. This was a full-blown, Mediterranean-wide operation. Traders were like ancient road warriors, traversing staggering distances to capture or purchase slaves from places as far-flung as Britannia to Egypt. Picture them crisscrossing the Mediterranean, not for a nice seaside holiday, but to peddle human lives. The sheer scope of it all is mind-boggling. We're talking thousands of slaves being shuffled around annually, with traders covering distances that make your daily commute look like a walk in the park. If you were in the slave trading business, you needed a stomach of steel and a heart that could handle being a little bit blackened. You'd be rubbing elbows with a who's who of ancient society, each as morally questionable as the next. Your best customers, the senators, the wealthy landowners, and even the emperors themselves. And let's not forget the competition. It was fierce, cutthroat, and as ethically dubious as you'd expect. There were no antitrust laws here, no unions to protect your resources, just a relentless drive to outdo your rivals. The financial stakes were high. Slave prices fluctuated like the stock market, influenced by everything from wars to crop failures. A skilled craftsman could fetch upwards of 2,000 denarii, while a healthy young male might go for around 1,200. To put that in perspective, a Roman legionary earned about 900 denarii a year. So, if you played your cards right, one good transaction could net you more than a soldier's annual salary. But it wasn't all profit and glory. Risks were part of the package, and losing a shipment to pirates or a storm could ruin you faster than you could say Julius Caesar. And then there was the moral quandary. Sure, the Roman elite justified their actions with lofty tales of bringing civilization to the barbaric fringes of the empire. But the reality was a bit more stomach-turning. The traders, you included, were cogs in a machine that saw humans as commodities, not individuals. It's hard to play the hero when you're the one putting the chains on. So, there you have it. A snapshot of the Roman slave trade, a beast of an industry that was as brutal as it was profitable. It was an enterprise built on the backs of the unfortunate and sustained by a society that saw its moral compass spinning wildly. As much as Rome loved to tout its virtues, the empire's heart was a marketplace where the currency was human lives, and the grand narrative of civilization was little more than a cover story for a very lucrative bottom line. But let's not romanticize this as some ancient version of a Wall Street thriller. Being a Roman slave trader wasn't about sipping wine on a yacht while your investments grew. It was more like starring in a high-stakes, ancient world version of The Amazing Race, complete with pirates, unpredictable markets, and a moral compass that pointed anywhere but north. First off, let's talk logistics, a topic that's as exciting as watching paint dry, but absolutely crucial for survival in this business. The Mediterranean Sea, while picturesque in your modern travel brochures, was essentially the Wild West of its time. Pirates weren't just a pesky nuisance. They were a full-blown occupational hazard. These marauders saw your cargo of human lives as a floating gold mine, and they certainly weren't deterred by any notions of decency. If you were a slave trader, dodging these sea bandits was a necessary skill, akin to playing an endless game of hide and seek, with your profits and possibly your own life at stake. The markets themselves were another beast entirely, chaotic and bustling, like the stock exchange floor, but with more yelling and less regulation. Delos, for instance, was a major hub. Imagine a crowded bazaar, but instead of exotic spices and silks, you're surrounded by human lives up for grabs. Delos was the Wall Street of the ancient slave trade, and the traders were its brokers, shouting prices and haggling like their lives depended on it, which in many ways they did. Prices here could swing wildly. A combination of supply, demand, and sheer market chaos determined the going rate for your human merchandise. The costs of doing business were no joke, either. The average price of a slave could range anywhere from 500 to 2,000 denarii. To put that into context, a Roman centurion, a high-ranking officer in the army, earned about 3,750 denarii annually. So purchasing a skilled slave could be equivalent to a substantial portion of a centurion's salary. This wasn't pocket change. It was a serious investment. And like any investment, it came with risks. A sudden storm at sea could wipe out your entire cargo faster than you could say Neptune's wrath, leaving you with nothing but a soggy tunic and empty pockets. But let's not forget the human element in all of this. The traders weren't just numbers and logistics. They were people trying to navigate an ethically murky world. In a society where morality often took a backseat to profit, the cognitive dissonance must have been palpable. Justifying this trade required a mental gymnastics routine worthy of an Olympic gold medal. The Romans convinced themselves they were bringing culture to the unwashed masses, but the reality was a lot grittier, more about maintaining the lucrative status quo than spreading any semblance of enlightenment. And speaking of maintaining the status quo, the Roman economy was a well-oiled machine with slaves as its fuel. It's no exaggeration to say that slaves were the backbone of Roman society, performing everything from household chores to skilled labor. Without them, the empire would have ground to a halt faster than a chariot with a broken wheel. This dependency created a vicious cycle, ensuring that the demand for slaves remained insatiable, and the traders' work, though morally repugnant, remained in high demand. In the grand narrative of Roman history, the slave trade is one of those dark corners that doesn't get much sunlight. It's tempting to focus on the architectural marvels, the philosophical advancements, and the military conquests. But peel back the layers, and you'll find the less glamorous truth. An empire built on the backs of those who had no choice but to bear its weight. As much as we'd like to see the Romans as enlightened torchbearers of civilization, their reliance on human trafficking paints a different picture, one that's less about glory and more about gritty reality. So, while Rome might have been the greatest show on earth, it's crucial to remember that the spectacle was made possible by those who remained unseen in the shadows. As we dive deeper into the logistics and risks of Roman slave trading, remember this. The true cost of the empire's grandeur wasn't just paid in coin, but in the countless lives bought and sold in its relentless pursuit of power and prosperity. Now, as we peel back the layers of the Roman slave trade, prepare to dive into the tangled web of social hierarchies and legal mazes that would make even a seasoned bureaucrat's head spin. If you thought the slave market was a free-for-all, think again. The Roman legal system was like an ancient version of a Kafka novel, just with more togas and fewer existential crises. Slave traders had to navigate a labyrinth of laws that could save their skins one moment and doom them the next. Let's start with the social pecking order. In the Roman Empire, social status was everything. Who you knew and where you stood in the hierarchy could make or break your career in slave trading faster than you could say, Veni, Vidi, Vici. At the top of the heap were the senators and equestrians, the 1% of their day, who were the primary buyers in this grim market. They needed slaves to run their vast estates and to show off their wealth. Because what good is a marble villa without a small army of slaves to keep it running? Below them were the plebeians, who might own a slave or two to help with the family business if they were lucky. But don't be fooled into thinking that being a slave trader automatically earned you a seat at the elite table. Traders occupied a peculiar niche in Roman society. On one hand, they were essential to the economy, supplying the labor force that kept everything ticking. On the other, they were looked down upon as purveyors of human misery. It was a profession that required a thick skin and an even thicker wallet, as the social stigma was often as sharp as a gladius. And let's not forget the legal quagmire that these traders had to wade through daily. Roman law, in all its complexity, was both a friend and foe. Designed to protect the interests of the elite, it was packed with regulations that could baffle even the most astute legal mind. For instance, the 12 Tables, Rome's earliest attempt at a code of law, included rules about the sale and treatment of slaves. But like any good piece of legislation, these were open to interpretation and exploitation. Consider the legal concept of peculium. This was a sort of financial allowance that slaves could accumulate, theoretically allowing them to buy their freedom. Sounds fair, right? Well, not so fast. The peculium was still technically the master's property, meaning it could be taken away faster than you could say Caesar's salad, if things went south. For traders, the peculium was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could be used as a selling point, making a slave more appealing to buyers who wanted a motivated workforce. On the other, it added a layer of financial dealings that could complicate sales and lead to disputes in the courts. Speaking of courts, you'd better have a top-notch lawyer on your side if you were a trader. Roman legal proceedings were as convoluted as a Senate debate, and losing a case could mean financial ruin or worse. Imagine dealing with a customer who claimed you sold them a defective slave. Yes, that was a thing. If the slave turned out to be sick or ran away shortly after purchase, you could be dragged to court faster than a charioteer at the Circus Maximus. The buyer might demand a refund or even compensation, and you'd need a legal eagle to navigate the courtroom drama. And oh, the regulations. The Senate, ever eager to maintain control, issued edicts that could change overnight based on the political climate. One moment, traders might receive tax breaks to encourage the import of slaves. The next, they'd be slapped with tariffs that could cripple their business. It was a legislative roller coaster that required traders to stay one step ahead or risk being crushed under the weight of bureaucracy. Let's not gloss over the bizarre legal loopholes that existed. In typical Roman fashion, these laws often seemed designed by the same minds that brought you public baths and aqueducts. Brilliant, but occasionally baffling. For example, a slave who was granted freedom could technically become a Roman citizen, yet their children might not enjoy the same status due to class restrictions. This created a murky legal grey area where everyone was guessing. Traders needed to be part-time lawyers themselves or risk falling into one of these traps. To make matters even juicier, manumission, the process of freeing a slave, was another legal quagmire. It wasn't just a magnanimous gesture by masters. It was steeped in legalities that could rival a modern-day tax code. Freed slaves, or liberty, often remained tied to their former masters through patronage, ensuring that the ties of dependence were never truly cut. For traders, this meant that selling a slave with the potential for future freedom required an intricate dance of paperwork and promises. Of course, the Senate's involvement didn't stop at laws. They were also keen on maintaining the moral fabric of society, or at least the illusion of it. Public morality laws were in place to ensure that the slave trade didn't spiral into absolute chaos, though they often were as effective as a sieve in a storm. Sure, traders had to present themselves as upstanding citizens, but everyone knew that behind closed doors it was a free-for-all. In essence, surviving as a Roman slave trader was like playing a game of legal and social chess, with every move scrutinized and every decision potentially disastrous. The Senate might have been the king on this board, but traders had to be nimble knights, dodging pitfalls and leveraging every advantage they could muster. The stakes were high, and the risks were great, but for those who succeeded, the rewards were just as immense. As we delve deeper into the labyrinth of Roman laws and social intricacies, remember this. The reality of the slave trade was not just about buying and selling lives. It was a complex dance of power, status, and survival in a society that thrived on contradictions and chaos. The traders had to be as savvy in politics as they were in commerce, balancing legality with profitability in a system that seemed destined to trip them up at every turn. They were the unsung jugglers of a society that demanded more than it offered, and they did it all while navigating a world as unpredictable as the Mediterranean Sea itself. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel this tangled tale of commerce, law, and human ambition. Navigating the Roman slave trade was like riding a roller coaster designed by an architect with a twisted sense of humor. Every twist and turn came with its own set of moral and ethical dilemmas that would leave even the most hardened trader's head spinning. Just when you thought you'd mastered the art of surviving the legal and social jungle, you'd find yourself face to face with the uncomfortable truth of your profession. You were trading in human souls, not silk or olive oil. Enter the world of Roman philosophy, where thinkers like Seneca the Younger were busy penning letters that would make even the most jaded among us pause for reflection. Seneca, a Stoic philosopher and advisor to Emperor Nero, had some interesting, if not paradoxical, thoughts on slavery. He wrote about the moral responsibilities of masters, urging them to treat their slaves with a degree of humanity that was, let's be honest, more aspirational than practical in those times. Seneca's letters are like a philosophical band-aid slapped over the gaping wound of Roman morality. He argued that a good man should treat slaves well because, in the grand cosmic scheme, we're all slaves to something. Deep, right. But try telling that to a trader whose livelihood depended on seeing slaves as commodities rather than compatriots. And while Seneca was waxing lyrical about the nobility of the human spirit, the traders were busy justifying their actions with a mental gymnastics routine worthy of an Olympic medal. They weren't just merchants. They were part-time philosophers, spinning tales of how their trade was a civilizing mission, bringing the light of Rome to the barbaric corners of the world. Never mind that this light often involved shackles and a one-way ticket to a life of servitude. It was all about framing the narrative, like a PR campaign that would make even the slickest modern spin doctor nod in appreciation. The picture painted by Roman propaganda was one of benevolent conquerors, but scratch the surface, and you'd find a reality as gritty as a Colosseum floor after a gladiator match. The empire's so-called civilizing mission was less about spreading culture and more about ensuring a steady supply of labor to stoke the fires of its vast economy. The romantic notion of Rome as a guiding light of civilization, about as authentic as a toga-themed frat party. Even the esteemed Cicero had his say on the matter, suggesting that slaves were a necessary part of economic life, a sentiment that would resonate with traders who needed to keep their moral qualms at bay while counting their denarii. The contradictions in Roman thought were as thick as the walls of the Senate House. On one hand, the intellectual elite preached about virtue and the proper treatment of all human beings. On the other, they turned a blind eye to the systemic exploitation that underpinned their society. To say that morality and profit were uneasy bedfellows in Rome would be the understatement of the millennium. The empire's economy was a juggernaut, fueled by conquest and labor, and traders were its unsung drivers, steering this behemoth with a blend of cunning and convenience. Sure, Romans loved to laud their virtues, but when it came down to the brass tacks of maintaining an empire, pragmatism often trumped principle. And let's not forget the psychological toll on the traders themselves. You couldn't just clock out and leave your conscience at the office. Every sale came with a tinge of moral ambiguity that even the most seasoned traders couldn't ignore forever. It's one thing to convince yourself that you're spreading culture. It's another to witness the human cost of that narrative day in and day out. Traders had to develop a thick skin, but even the toughest hide has its limits. In this theater of moral dilemmas, traders found themselves playing roles that were as complex as any Roman drama. They were part businessman, part negotiator, part philosopher, and part juggler of ethical quandaries. They had to reconcile their actions with the lofty ideals of Roman society, all while keeping an eye on the bottom line. It was a balancing act that would give even the most skilled acrobat a run for their money. To wrap your head around the moral maze of Roman slave trading, you need to dig deeper into the societal norms that allowed such a system to thrive. The Romans didn't wake up one morning and decide to make human trafficking a cornerstone of their economy. It was a gradual process, rooted in centuries of conquest and expansion, where the lines between conqueror and civilizer blurred into a convenient grey area. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality was as clear as a Mediterranean sunrise. The slave trade was an industry driven by profit, not principle. Traders were cogs in a machine that viewed human lives as commodities, and no amount of philosophical waxing or moral posturing could change that fundamental fact. The Roman Empire, with all its grandeur and glory, was built on a foundation of exploitation, a reality that was as inescapable as a Roman tax collector. As we continue to unravel this tangled web of commerce, morality, and human ambition, remember that the story isn't over yet. The Roman slave trade was a complex beast, and we're only scratching the surface of its many layers. So buckle up, because the ride isn't over. There's more intrigue and insight to come as we delve deeper into this tale of power, profit, and the price of civilization. Stay tuned, because the next leg of our journey promises to be just as enlightening and eye-opening as the last. The Roman slave trade saga, a winding tale of commerce and conscience, now brings us to its final act, a chapter where the thriving industry begins its slow, inevitable decline. The empire that once seemed as unstoppable as a gladiator in his prime started to stumble, weighed down by its own excesses and contradictions. You see, Rome's over-reliance on slave labor was like building a house of cards. Impressive while it stood, but precariously vulnerable to the slightest shift in winds. As the empire expanded, so did its appetite for new slaves to fuel its insatiable economic engine. But as any savvy investor will tell you, diversification is key, and Rome had put too many eggs in the slave basket. When the conquest slowed and the flow of fresh captives began to dry up, the reality of their dependence hit home like a brick through a villa window. Suddenly, the empire's workforce was looking less like a robust labor force and more like a dwindling resource heading straight for scarcity. The slave trade's decline wasn't an overnight sensation, more of a slow burn, like a candle melting down to its last flicker. With fewer new slaves entering the market, prices started climbing faster than a charioteer with the wind at his back. By the 2nd century AD, the cost of a slave had doubled, sometimes even tripled. The days of picking up a skilled worker for a year's soldier's wage were long gone. Now it was more like the price of a small estate. And with these prices rising, the economy that had once thrived on cheap labor began to feel the pinch. Even the legendary Roman infrastructure, those aqueducts and roads we all admire, felt the strain. The upkeep of these great feats of engineering required a steady stream of labor, and without it, the empire's famed efficiency started to crumble. Public buildings decayed, roads became impassable, and aqueducts ran dry, turning Rome's pride into a public relations nightmare. The societal impact was just as profound. Rome's addiction to slave labor had stifled innovation like a toga too tight around the neck. Why invest in new technology or farming techniques when a slave could do the work for less? This reliance created a stagnation that left the Roman economy gasping for breath like a marathon runner after the final sprint. While the world outside Rome's borders was evolving, the empire remained stuck in its traditional ways, unable to adapt to changing realities. It was a classic case of resting on one's laurels, only to find them wilting. And let's not gloss over the instability this caused. With a growing disparity between the classes, social tensions simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. The plebeians, those everyday Romans who once had a shot at upward mobility, found themselves edged out of jobs by slave labor. Civil unrest became as common as a Roman bath, leading to revolts and uprisings that shook the very foundations of imperial power. The mighty Roman Empire, once a beacon of order, now teetered on the brink of chaos. Reflecting on the legacy of Roman glory, it's tempting to buy into the myths of invincibility and grandeur. After all, who doesn't love a good epic tale of conquest and civilization? But the truth is, Rome's reliance on slavery wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a cautionary tale of what happens when the scales of power and ethics tip too far one way. The empire's decline serves as a stark reminder that no edifice, no matter how grand, can stand forever on a foundation built from exploitation and inequality. And yet, the allure of Roman power persists in modern times, a testament to the seductive nature of legacy. We often glamorize the empire's achievements, conveniently overlooking the uncomfortable truths lurking in its shadow. The Romans, with their baths and roads, left behind a blueprint of civilization that continues to captivate our imagination. But it's essential to remember the full story, one that includes not just triumphs, but also the human cost of those achievements. As we wrap up our journey through the gritty world of Roman slave trading, it's clear that history has a way of repeating itself, albeit in new guises. The Roman experience offers a lens through which to view modern issues of power, ethics, and economic dependency. It challenges us to question the systems we build and the narratives we weave, urging us to consider not just the legacies we inherit, but those we leave behind. So as you drift off into the annals of history with newfound knowledge, ponder this. The Romans were architects of their own destiny, both magnificent and flawed. Their story is a mosaic of ambition and ambiguity, a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the lessons they teach us endure. As we navigate our own modern complexities, perhaps we can learn from their triumphs and their mistakes, crafting a legacy that is as mindful as it is magnificent. Rome's Colosseum is the Beyoncé of ancient architecture, iconic, larger than life, and possibly the most famous amphitheater ever constructed. Forget your average stadium. This was a 50,000-seat behemoth, making it the MetLife Stadium of its day, but with a whole lot more gladiators and surprisingly fewer nachos. Standing at an impressive 157 feet high, about as tall as a 15-story building, the Colosseum was a testament to Roman engineering prowess and their unapologetic love for spectacle. Built between AD 70 and 80 under the Emperors Vespasian and his heir, Titus, this stone and concrete colossus was completed in a mere decade. Yes, you heard that right, a decade, which in ancient construction terms is like building a skyscraper over a long weekend. Now, in case you're wondering what drew the masses to this ancient version of the Hunger Games, let's talk about the entertainment on offer. The Colosseum was the venue for gladiatorial contests, wild animal hunts, public executions, and even mock naval battles. Yep, they flooded the arena to reenact sea skirmishes. Talk about commitment to authenticity. It was as if the Romans decided that if they couldn't have Netflix, they'd just invent their own version of Game of Thrones, live and in 3D. But before we get too carried away with romanticizing this ancient entertainment hub, let's address the rather glaring ethical elephant in the room, the whole blood sport angle. The Romans had a bit of an obsession with violence as entertainment, and while today's sports fans might argue over the brutality of American football or rugby, the Romans were in a league of their own. We're talking about a society that casually threw around phrases like Ave Imperator, Morituri te salutant. Hail, Emperor, those who are about to die salute you, as if it was the ancient equivalent of play ball. While this might sound barbaric by today's standards, it was quite the political spectacle. These events were a way for emperors to gain popularity and curry favor with the public. By providing free games, the rulers kept the masses entertained and hopefully less inclined to revolt. Bread and circuses, folks. It's not just a catchy phrase. It was a full-blown strategy. Think of it as the ancient Roman version of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but with more lions and less Instagram. Economically, the Colosseum wasn't just a black hole for funds. The construction itself was a job creator, employing thousands of workers and craftsmen. And once it was up and running, it was a bustling hub of commerce. Vendors sold food and drinks, and there was probably some form of ancient merchandising going on. Get your official gladiator tunics here, 2 for the price of 1. Politically, these grand spectacles were Rome's way of flexing its muscles. The ability to stage such elaborate events was a demonstration of power and wealth, a not-so-subtle reminder to everyone of Rome's dominance. Look at what we can do. Build a giant theatre, flood it with water, and still have enough left over to conquer half the known world. It was an effective PR move that said, Rome's in charge, and don't you forget it. But let's not forget the practicalities involved in such an ambitious project. The Colosseum was an architectural marvel, featuring a complex system of vaults to support its massive structure, not to mention the intricate network of tunnels and cages below the arena floor. You could almost call it the ancient version of backstage at a rock concert, albeit with less pyrotechnics and more tigers. The Romans were masters of concrete, using a special mix that included volcanic ash, which made their constructions durable enough to last centuries. The Colosseum's design was so effective that it influenced stadium architecture for millennia. And those numbered seating tiers. They were the ancient precursor to today's reserved seating, offering a surprisingly modern touch in a brutal world. Despite the grandeur and glory, it's essential to recognize the darker side of these spectacles. The Colosseum was a place where life and death were decided for the sake of entertainment. The gladiators, many of whom were slaves or prisoners of war, had little choice in their fate. Their lives were a high-stakes gamble, with freedom often promised to those who could survive long enough to win the crowd's favor. The economic and political motivations behind the Colosseum were clear. Keep the populace entertained and distracted while showcasing the might and magnificence of Rome. However, beneath the surface of this architectural wonder lay the grim reality of a society that reveled in the spectacle of human suffering. So, while we can marvel at the Colosseum's engineering brilliance and its role as an entertainment hub, we must also acknowledge the ethical complexities of its history. It's a reminder that behind every grand structure and captivating story lies a tapestry of human experience, both triumphant and tragic. As the sun set on Rome and the cheers faded, the Colosseum stood as a silent witness to the city's rise, its glory, and its inevitable decline. As the Colosseum stood witness to the ebb and flow of Roman power, another marvel of Roman engineering was quietly humming away, doing the dirty work of maintaining an empire that literally needed to stay afloat. Enter the aqueducts. These ancient water highways were the arteries of Rome, and Aqua Claudia, one of the most impressive of them all, was the Yorta. Imagine a structure so grand, it made even the mighty Tiber River feel like a mere trickle in comparison. Built between 38 and 52 AD under the reigns of Caligula and Claudius. Yes, the Caligula, infamous for his less-than-stable tendencies. Aqua Claudia was a Herculean project, spanning over 69 kilometers, approximately 43 miles, with an elevation that could rival some modern skyscrapers. This aqueduct was a testament to Roman engineering prowess and their borderline obsession with plumbing. If you think your morning shower is a luxury, try living in ancient Rome where the concept of running water was VIP treatment. Now, let's talk numbers. The construction of Aqua Claudia wasn't cheap. It cost the Roman treasury a hefty sum, estimated at 350 million sestertii, which in today's terms would be akin to funneling billions into a single infrastructure project. But why spend such a fortune on a glorified water pipeline? Simple. Romans were obsessed with baths. Public baths were the social media of ancient Rome. They were places where gossip flowed as freely as water, where political alliances were forged, and where the city's elite could show off their tan lines, or lack thereof. These baths, or thermae, were not just about hygiene, they were about status. The baths of Caracalla, for instance, could accommodate up to 1,600 bathers at a time. Picture that. A grandiose, ancient water park with the added benefit of not having to worry about sunburn because, hey, it was indoors. Aqua Claudia was the lifeline to these watery palaces, ensuring that Rome's elite could soak away the troubles of empire building. While the aqueducts were marvels of engineering, they were also symbols of Rome's might and ingenuity. The Romans didn't just bring water, they conquered it. They transformed the landscape, cutting through mountains and bridging valleys with arches that seemed to defy gravity. This was no mere exercise in utility, it was a statement. Look at what we can do, the aqueducts seemed to say. We can tame nature itself. But let's not get too swept away by the grandeur. The reality was a tad more murky. For starters, despite the impressive waterworks, Roman hygiene was exactly the squeaky clean affair we might imagine. Yes, they had baths, but the communal nature of these facilities meant that cleanliness was more of a suggestion than a guarantee. Think of it as an ancient version of a crowded public pool, minus the chlorine. And while the rich could afford private baths with heated floors, an ancient version of underfloor heating, the average Roman citizen was left to contend with the less glamorous side of urban living. Speaking of public health, the aqueducts themselves weren't immune to issues. The lead pipes used for transporting water were a ticking time bomb, though the extent of lead poisoning is still debated among academics. It certainly adds a layer of irony to the Roman pursuit of purity. And let's not forget about maintenance. Keeping these colossal structures in working order was a Herculean task, requiring a small army of slaves and laborers. The unsung heroes of Roman infrastructure, they toiled away behind the scenes, ensuring that the city's water gushed forth uninterrupted. Now, if you're thinking that all this sounds a bit too familiar, you're not wrong. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and we're still grappling with water management issues of our own. Flint, Michigan, anyone. The Romans might have mastered the art of the aqueduct, but even they couldn't escape the complexities of balancing infrastructure with politics and finance. It's a tale as old as time. The struggle to provide essential services while keeping the coffers filled and the populace content. The societal impact of these aqueducts was profound. They enabled the growth of Rome, turning it from a collection of hills into a sprawling metropolis. With water came agriculture, sanitation and trade, all of which fueled the empire's expansion. Yet, for all their achievements, the Romans were still human. They loved their baths, their wine and their gossip, proving that while empires rise and fall, some things never change. In the end, the aqueducts of Rome were more than just a means of delivering water. They were a symbol of an empire at its peak, a reminder of what could be achieved when ambition met innovation. But they were also a testament to the challenges of sustaining a civilization, a nod to the reality that even the most advanced societies are only as strong as their ability to manage their resources. And as the dust settles on another chapter of history, one truth remains. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And speaking of the more things change, the more they stay the same, let's dive into the swirling cauldron of ambition and chaos that was the Roman Forum. Ah, the Forum, the beating heart of ancient Rome, a place that could give Times Square a run for its money in terms of hustle and bustle. It was here that Roman life was on full display, like a reality TV show set in marble and stone. Think of the Forum as the Swiss Army knife of Roman public spaces. It was the epicenter of political maneuvering, commercial activity, and social gossip, all rolled into one bustling, chaotic piazza. Your average day in the Forum might include a heated debate between senators in the Curia, a public trial at the Rostra, and a gaggle of merchants haggling over the price of olive oil, all while the plebeians, or common folk, roamed about, perhaps wondering just how much of the action they were actually benefiting from. Now, let's dabble in some numbers to ground this ancient madhouse in reality. The Roman Forum was a sprawling complex, roughly 820 feet long and 560 feet wide. While that might not seem massive by today's standards, Central Park it was not. It was the nerve center for an empire that controlled vast swathes of Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia. A feat made possible, in part, by the labyrinthine tangle of politics and commerce that was hashed out in this very space. But let's not get too swept away by the grandeur. For all the glory and marble, the Forum was also a den of political intrigue that could rival any modern-day political scandal. Roman politics were as cutthroat as a gladiator match, minus the lions. Senators schemed and plotted, alliances were as fluid as the Tiber, and bribery was as commonplace as the toga. Quintessentially Roman, the Forum was where the phrase et tu, brute, could easily have been coined, although perhaps not over a Caesar salad. And speaking of Julius Caesar, here, that's where things get juicy. He was the rock star of his day, and like any good celebrity, his influence was palpable in the Forum. His grand plans included the construction of the Basilica Julia, a sprawling complex that served as a courthouse and space for public meetings. It was a bold statement that screamed, "I'm Julius Caesar, and I control the purse strings." It's worth noting that the basilica cost a mind-boggling sum of 60 million sesterces, enough to make even the most free-spending politician wince. Yet, this was par for the course in Rome, where the political elite invested heavily in the city's infrastructure as a means of solidifying their power and legacy. But while the Forum was a stage for Rome's elite to flex their political muscles, it also had a darker, less romantic side. Public executions were held here, a grim reminder of the empire's iron-fisted rule. Justice was often swift and brutal, dispensed in front of a crowd that was as likely to cheer as it was to jeer. It's a sobering thought that the same place where Cicero might have delivered one of his rousing orations could also host a grisly spectacle of death. In Rome, the line between civil discourse and savage punishment was often blurred, sometimes literally. Economically, the Forum was a bustling marketplace where merchants and traders plied their wares, from spices and silks to slaves and livestock. The sheer volume of trade conducted here was staggering, with goods and currency flowing like water through the aqueducts. We're talking about a commercial hub that was the envy of the ancient world, a place where fortunes were made and lost at the drop of a denarius. But let's not forget the human side of this economic engine. For the average Roman, life in the Forum was a daily grind. The plebeians, the working-class citizens, might travel to the Forum to sell their produce or to find work, rubbing shoulders with the patricians who could afford to stroll about leisurely, engaging in philosophical debates or haggling over the latest fashion in togas. This social stratification was as much a part of the Forum's fabric as its marble columns, a stark reminder that while Rome was the city of dreams, it was also a place of great disparities. And then there were the myth-busting realities of Roman civility. While we often romanticize ancient Rome as a bastion of culture and sophistication, the truth is a bit more complicated. The Forum was as likely to host a brawl as it was a debate, and the noise and chaos would have been overwhelming. It was a place where the scent of incense mingled with the less-than-pleasant aroma of humanity, a cacophony of voices blending with the clatter of chariots and the braying of animals. Not exactly the serene, orderly society one might imagine. So, why does the Forum matter? Why should we care about this ancient marketplace of ideas and goods? Because it was the beating heart of an empire that shaped the world as we know it. The Forum was where decisions were made that impacted millions, where culture and commerce merged to create a society that was as vibrant as it was volatile. It was a place of contradictions, where the lofty ideals of Roman law and governance coexisted with the gritty reality of human ambition and folly. In the end, the Roman Forum was more than just a collection of buildings and statues. It was a microcosm of Rome itself, a place where power, wealth, and influence collided in a grand spectacle that was equal parts inspiring and sobering. As we wander through the ruins today, we're reminded of the empire's grandeur and its flaws. a testament to the enduring legacy of a civilization that was both extraordinary and deeply, irreparably human. As we leave the Forum behind, the story of Rome continues to unfold, drawing us deeper into the complexities of an empire that knew no bounds, both in its ambition and its excess. Stay tuned, because we're just getting started. And speaking of getting started, let's pivot to one of the most jaw-dropping feats of ancient engineering, the Pantheon. No, I'm not talking about some run-of-the-mill temple to a forgotten god. This is the architectural equivalent of a mic drop, Rome's Pantheon with its mind-boggling dome and celestial oculus. If the Colosseum was Rome's blockbuster action flick, the Pantheon was its Oscar-worthy art film, one of those cerebral pieces that leave you pondering the meaning of life. Built around 126 AD under Emperor Hadrian, the Pantheon wasn't just a temple, it was a statement. Imagine a building so audacious, it makes Frank Lloyd Wright look like he played it safe. This was a place where architecture met astronomy, with an open-air oculus at the top of its dome acting as a 142-foot-wide celestial portal. And get this, the dome itself is a perfect hemisphere, 142 feet in diameter, which means you could fit the entire thing inside a giant sphere. Talk about cosmic design. It's like the Romans looked up at the sky and thought, you know what would be cool? Bringing a piece of that down here. Now, before you get swept up in the romanticism, let's dig into the nitty-gritty. The Pantheon's design was revolutionary, yes, but it wasn't all sunshine and marble. The building's massive dome was made possible by an ingenious use of concrete, a mix that included volcanic ash to make it lighter and stronger. This wasn't your grandma's concrete. It was a concoction so advanced, it makes our modern mixes look like Play-Doh. And let's not forget the labor force that brought this architectural wonder to life. Tens of thousands of workers, many of whom were slaves or low-paid laborers. Because, surprise, surprise, the breathtaking beauty of the Pantheon came with a hefty human cost. Economically speaking, the Pantheon was a monumental investment. While exact figures are lost to history, maintaining such an architectural marvel would have siphoned off a considerable chunk of the imperial treasury. But why spend so lavishly on a single building? Simple, religious significance and imperial propaganda. The Pantheon was initially dedicated to all the Roman gods, a sort of divine multiplex, if you will. But by Hadrian's time, it had morphed into a monument to imperial power. It was less about the gods and more about the emperor showcasing his grandiosity. A little reminder that Rome wasn't just a city. It was the center of the universe. Despite its grandeur, the Pantheon wasn't just about worship. It was a symbol of Rome's engineering prowess, a flex of architectural muscle that said, "Look what we can do." The sheer scale of the project was a testament to Roman ingenuity and ambition, a bold statement in a city already bursting with architectural wonders. And the myth-busting reality. While we marvel at its beauty, let's not forget the less glamorous side. The construction process likely involved harsh working conditions and a workforce whose contributions have been largely erased from the historical narrative. The Pantheon is a reminder that behind every grand facade lies a story of human toil and sacrifice. Politically, the Pantheon was a masterstroke. By erecting such a monumental structure, Hadrian wasn't just honoring the gods. He was boosting his own legacy. The Pantheon was a giant billboard proclaiming the emperor's power and Rome's dominance. It was Hadrian's way of saying, we're not just a city, we're an empire. And let's be real. There's nothing like a little divine endorsement to keep the populace on your side. But here's the kicker. For all its majesty, the Pantheon also served a practical purpose. Its massive interior space was a refuge from the chaos of Roman life, a tranquil oasis amid the city's hustle and bustle. You could step inside and leave behind the noise, the grime, and the social stratification. It was a place where anyone, from senator to slave, could gaze up at the oculus and lose themselves in the celestial dance of light and shadow. Yet, despite its awe-inspiring presence, the Pantheon was not immune to the passage of time. It has survived nearly 2,000 years of history, enduring fires, invasions, and even the occasional earthquake. Why? Because as empires rose and fell, the pantheon remained a constant, a reminder of what human creativity and ambition could achieve. And perhaps that's the real magic of the pantheon, its ability to transcend the ages, offering each generation a glimpse into the soul of a civilization that dared to dream big. So next time you find yourself under its great dome, remember, the pantheon is more than just an architectural wonder. It's a testament to the dual nature of human endeavor, the sublime and the sordid, the dream and the drudgery. It's a reminder that behind every grand achievement lies a story of sacrifice and struggle, a tapestry of human experience that is as complex as it is captivating. As we leave the pantheon behind, remember that Rome wasn't just about epic structures and grand gestures. It was a living, breathing city, full of contradictions and complexities. But don't worry, our journey through the marvels of Rome is far from over. The Eternal City has more stories to tell, more secrets to unveil. So stay tuned, because we're not done exploring the wonders and the woes of ancient Rome. The saga continues, and who knows what marvels we'll uncover next. As the echoes of Rome's architectural wonders fade into history, let's take a step back and ponder the monumental legacy of these ancient achievements. The Romans didn't just build for today. They created structures that echoed through the ages, laying the groundwork for modern urban design. Now, it's easy to romanticize this as a pure love for grandeur. But behind every triumph of Roman engineering was a fascinating cocktail of innovation, ambition, and yes, a fair share of exploitation. First, let's talk innovation. The Romans were like the Apple of the ancient world, constantly pushing boundaries, except instead of iPhones, they were crafting concrete that could withstand the test of time. They mixed volcanic ash into their concrete, creating a material so resilient that their constructions outlasted empires. Fast forward 2 millennia, and architects still look to the Pantheon's dome as a masterclass in engineering genius. Its design principles echo in every modern stadium and rotunda. And those aqueducts, they didn't just quench the thirst of an empire, they laid the blueprints for urban water systems worldwide. The Romans turned plumbing into a fine art, and we're still drawing from their playbook every time we turn on a faucet. But let's not gloss over the darker hues in this fresco of innovation. For every marvel, there was a crew of unsung laborers, often slaves, whose sweat, toil, and sometimes lives were the real mortar of these edifices. The Colosseum might have been a venue for grandeur and gore, but it was built on the back of captive workers, thrown into labor as unwilling participants in this grand narrative. And while the emperors may have basked in the glory of their monumental projects, the cost was borne by the masses, who often had little choice in financing these feats through taxes and tributes. So, when you admire the sweeping arches of an aqueduct, remember the thousands who labored, unseen and unheard, to bring water to a city that was in constant need of quenching its imperial thirst. Economically, the Romans used architecture as a tool of both urban planning and political propaganda. By investing in public spaces and infrastructure, they weren't just making life more convenient, they were cementing their legacy. The Roman Forum, a chaotic hub of commerce and politics, was as much about asserting dominance as it was about daily trade. When you walk through a modern city square, teeming with life, you're seeing Rome's blueprint in action. The idea of designing spaces that serve both public utility and political messaging was a Roman specialty, one we've inherited and adapted through the ages. And here's a fun twist. The Romans were the original urban developers who understood the value of aesthetics and functionality. They realized that grandeur could serve as a distraction and a tool for governance. By keeping the populace entertained and awed, they managed to maintain control and suppress dissent. Bread and circuses weren't just distractions. They were strategic moves in the grand chess game of empire. Imagine, if you will, a modern city council meeting where the agenda includes building a colossal amphitheater to keep the peace. It sounds absurd, yet the ethos hasn't changed much. Today's urban planners still aim to create spaces that serve both public needs and political ends, albeit with fewer gladiators. Politically, The Romans weren't just building structures, they were constructing narratives. Each edifice was a testament to their dominance, a physical manifestation of their rule that said, "We're here, and we're not going anywhere." The Pantheon wasn't just a temple, it was a cosmic declaration of imperial might. The aqueducts weren't merely water carriers, they were arteries pumping life into the heart of an empire. And while the Colosseum entertained, it also reinforced the idea of Rome as an unconquerable force, a superpower that could afford to stage elaborate spectacles purely for the amusement of its citizens. Now, as we ponder how the Romans would fare in today's world, you can't help but chuckle at the thought of an emperor navigating modern bureaucracy. Imagine Julius Caesar trying to get a building permit in New York, or Caligula dealing with environmental regulations for his aqueducts. The mind boggles. Yet, the principles they established in urban planning, public works, and entertainment remain foundational. It's as if the Romans handed us a toolkit for civilization, one we've been adapting and expanding ever since. So, what does all this tell us about modern society? For starters, that the human penchant for grandeur, spectacle, and a touch of hubris is nothing new. Our skyscrapers echo the ambition of Roman temples. Our sports arenas are the descendants of the Colosseum. Even our city planning owes a debt to Roman ingenuity. But let's not forget the lessons of excess and exploitation. The Romans showed us that while innovation can propel a society forward, it's imperative to balance ambition with equity, ensuring that progress doesn't come at the cost of those who build it. In the end, Rome's legacy is a testament to human creativity and the perennial struggle to balance innovation with exploitation, power with responsibility. As we stroll through the ruins of their world, we're reminded of the enduring impact of their vision and the cautionary tales of their excesses. So the next time you find yourself gazing at a city's skyline or marveling at a piece of modern infrastructure, take a moment to appreciate the echoes of ancient Rome and the timeless dance between ambition and reality. And as we wrap up this journey through Rome's architectural wonders, remember that history is more than just a collection of facts and figures. It's a narrative full of humanity's triumphs and tragedies. The Romans might have been masters of stone and concrete, but they also teach us about the fragility of empires, the importance of sustainable innovation, and the power of architecture to shape not just our cities, but our civilization. So, as the sun sets on this chapter of history, let's carry forward these lessons with wit, wisdom, and a little bit of wonder. After all, the more things change, the more they echo the past. The late Yuan dynasty, folks, was about as organized as a cat-herding contest. If you thought Mongol rule was all about galloping horses and Genghis Khan-style conqueror glory, think again. By the 14th century, the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty had devolved into something resembling a badly managed theme park. The economy was in shambles, the social system was creaky, and rebellions were popping up like mushrooms after rain. Let's talk about the economy first, because, well, money makes the world go round, and back then it was no different. The Yuan dynasty's currency, a paper money system called keo, was as valuable as monopoly money after a certain point. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread with a wad of cash that, thanks to rampant inflation, wasn't even worth the paper it was printed on. The government's incessant printing of money, without backing it up with hard currency, like silver or gold, led to inflation rates that soared higher than a kite on a windy day. The common people, already overburdened with taxes, found themselves unable to afford basic necessities. It's the kind of fiscal policy that makes you want to pat the ancient economists on the back and say, "Nice try, but maybe don't quit your day job." As if economic woes weren't enough, nature decided to join the chaos party with a series of devastating floods and famines. The Yellow River was particularly notorious for its mood swings, frequently bursting its banks and wreaking havoc on the agricultural heartlands. It's like Mother Nature decided to play a cruel joke on the farmers, who were already struggling to scrape by. With crops failing and stomachs rumbling, discontent brewed faster than a pot of ancient Chinese tea. Enter the Red Turban Rebellion, a peasant uprising that made the ruling class break out in a cold sweat. This wasn't just a few disgruntled villagers with pitchforks. It was a full-blown rebellion that spread across northern China like wildfire. Their name might sound like they were a band of jaunty revolutionaries, but make no mistake, these folks were serious about change. They were fueled by a mix of millenarian Buddhist beliefs and sheer desperation, a recipe for upheaval if there ever was one. Now, amidst all this chaos, let's introduce Zhu Yuanzhang. He's the guy who's about to pull a Cinderella move and go from rags to emperor robes. Born in 1328 to a poor peasant family in the Anhui province, Zhu had a life trajectory that was less silver spoon and more wooden chopstick. After his family succumbed to a famine-induced death, Zhu spent time as a Buddhist monk, probably because the monastery was one of the few places offering free meals. But even monkhood couldn't escape the political turbulence, as monasteries themselves were often caught in the crossfire of rebel and government forces. Zhu's rise to power is the stuff of legend, but let's clear up some misconceptions. Forget the romantic tales of a noble hero divinely destined to rule. Zhu was more of a savvy, opportunistic strategist who knew how to play the game. He joined the Red Turban Rebellion not because he was a born leader, but because it was a smart career move. Talk about climbing the corporate ladder, or in this case, the rebel hierarchy. By 1368, Zhu had outmaneuvered his rivals and managed to seize the throne, founding the Ming Dynasty. But let's not pretend he walked into the Forbidden City with a halo over his head. Zhu's path was paved with alliances, betrayals, and a fair share of ruthless eliminations. It's a story that's less about divine right and more about political chess. Zhu wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, or bloody, for that matter. The myths surrounding Zhu Yuanzhang's rise often gloss over the gritty details. Stories paint him as a benevolent ruler with an almost saintly demeanor. Reality check. Zhu was as pragmatic and authoritarian as they come. His reign was marked by strict laws and a centralized power structure that left little room for dissent. He implemented the Ming Code, which was as comprehensive as it was draconian, covering everything from how to deal with treason to the proper way to file a tax return. Spoiler alert, treason was generally frowned upon. Zhu's consolidation of power wasn't just about crushing enemies. It was also about creating a lasting legacy. He moved the capital from Nanjing to Beijing, commissioning the construction of the Forbidden City, a symbol of imperial grandeur that still stands today. It's like he decided to leave a massive, "I was here," sign for future generations. The Forbidden City wasn't just a palace. It was a statement of power, designed to awe and intimidate anyone who dared question the emperor's authority. Yet, for all his successes, Zhu's reign was not without its darker moments. Paranoia ran as deep as the Yellow River, leading to purges that would make even the most hardened Game of Thrones fan wince. Thousands of officials were executed on charges of corruption and conspiracy, whether or not they were guilty. Zhu's reign of terror ensured that loyalty was absolute, but it also bred a culture of fear and suspicion that lingered long after his death. So here we have it, the rise of the Ming Dynasty, a tale wrapped in layers of myth and reality. Zhu Yuanzhang's journey from peasant to emperor is a reminder that history is as much about power struggles and human ambition as it is about grand narratives. As the Yuan dynasty's wobbly Jenga tower finally toppled, Zhu built his own empire on the rubble, showing that sometimes the unlikeliest of leaders emerge from the most chaotic of times. While Zhu Yuanzhang was busy building his empire from the ashes of the Yuan dynasty, he wasn't exactly handing out friendship bracelets. Transforming a ragtag band of rebels into a disciplined force is a bit like trying to turn a garage band into a symphony orchestra, minus the sheet music. Zhu's charisma and strategic mind were his instruments, and he played them like a maestro. His talents in organization and leadership were a match for his paranoia, which, let's just say, ran deeper than the Grand Canal. Zhu's journey to consolidate power was a masterclass in political maneuvering. He had a knack for using suspicion like a sculptor, uses clay molding alliances with one hand while keeping the other ready to strike down any perceived threat. To say Zhu was cautious would be an understatement. He could sniff out a conspiracy like a bloodhound, and he wasn't afraid to use a heavy hand to keep his subordinates in line. His inner circle, if you could call it that, was more like a revolving door of officials who lived in perpetual fear of being purged. Now, about that disciplined force. Zhu didn't just tell his troops to shape up or ship out. He instilled a rigorous code of conduct that demanded loyalty and obedience. The Ming military became a well-oiled machine, with a complex hierarchy and a clear chain of command. Zhu's generals were expected to be both warriors and administrators, managing regions as effectively as they led troops into battle. It was a delicate balance of carrot and stick, with more than a few heads rolling when the stick came into play. But what's a Ming army without a bureaucracy to match? Zhu's administration was like a finely tuned watch, if the watch were being monitored by an overly attentive parent. He implemented a system of checks and balances that would make today's micromanagers blush. The bureaucracy was vast and detailed, with officials responsible for everything from tax collection to agricultural planning. It was a world where no paper went unsigned, no transaction unrecorded. This meticulous approach ensured that Zhu's rule was absolute, but it also meant that governance was as slow as a snail on a leisurely stroll. This brings us to Zhu's frugality, a trait that's often painted as an emperor's wise thriftiness. In reality, it was more about narrative control than penny-pinching. Zhu wasn't interested in building lavish palaces or hosting extravagant banquets. His vision was rooted in practicality and control. Every coin spent needed to serve the empire, not personal luxury. There was no room for opulence in Zhu's world. He was far too busy crafting a legacy that would withstand the sands of time. The Forbidden City, while grand, was a rare indulgence, serving as a fortress of power rather than a playground for the elite. This centralized power came with its costs. Zhu's empire was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided stability and order in a region that had known chaos for too long. On the other, it bred fear and resentment among those who felt the emperor was a tad too involved in their daily lives. The average bureaucrat probably felt like they were living in a glass house, every move scrutinized by an emperor who, despite his humble beginnings, now wielded authority with an iron grip. The costs of centralizing power weren't just political. Economically, the empire was a complex tapestry of production, trade, and taxation. Zhu's frugality meant that the imperial treasury was flush with funds, but it came at the expense of local economies, which often found themselves squeezed by taxes and regulations. The emperor's insistence on maintaining control over every aspect of governance meant that local innovation was stifled, and economic growth was more of a slow crawl than a sprint. Zhu Yuanzhang's reign was a tightrope walk between maintaining order and fostering prosperity. His efforts to mold a disciplined force and a micromanaged bureaucracy were as much about ensuring his own survival as they were about building a lasting dynasty. Paranoia and cunning were his constant companions, and while they served him well in consolidating power, they also left a legacy of suspicion that would linger long after his reign ended. As Zhu navigated the complex web of alliances and rivalries, he showed that sometimes the most successful leaders are those who know when to keep their friends close and their enemies closer. So, while Zhu's rise to power was a triumph of strategy and willpower, it was also a reminder of the costs of absolute control. His empire was a marvel of its time, yet beneath the surface, it was a cauldron of tension and unrest. The Ming dynasty, with all its grandeur and glory, was a testament to the power of a single man's vision, but also a cautionary tale of the lengths one might go to maintain that vision in a world rife with challenges. As Zhu Yuanzhang continued to shape his empire, he left a mark on history that was as indelible as it was complex, setting the stage for the next chapter in China's unfolding story. While Zhu Yuanzhang was busy playing the imperial chess game with a mix of paranoia and pragmatism, the Ming dynasty was gearing up for its own renaissance, Chinese style. Picture this. The economy was getting a makeover, that would make even the most seasoned HGTV fanatics swoon. Trade routes, which had been as neglected as that treadmill-turned-coat rack in your spare room, were finally being dusted off and put to good use. And leading this economic revolution was the Grand Canal, the artery that pumped life into the heart of China. The Grand Canal, folks, was the kind of infrastructure project that would make a modern civil engineer weep with envy. Stretching over 1,100 miles, it connected the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, making it the superhighway of its time. The canal wasn't just about moving goods, it was about moving ideas, cultures, and economies. Think of it as the Silk Road's aquatic cousin, minus the camels, but with plenty of junks and barges. By the time the Ming Dynasty was in full swing, the canal had undergone an extreme makeover, allowing for the efficient transport of grain from the fertile south to the capital in the north. It was like a conveyor belt for rice, ensuring the emperor's granaries were as full as a Thanksgiving dinner plate. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the Grand Canal without acknowledging the human cost. Building and maintaining this colossal waterway required a workforce that could rival the population of a small country. Thousands of laborers toiled under harsh conditions, their sweat and toil fueling an economic engine that powered the Ming Dynasty's prosperity. It's a classic case of one person's triumph being another's back-breaking reality. With the canal flowing smoothly and the economy humming like a well-tuned zither, China was ready to strut its stuff on the world stage. Enter the treasure fleets of Zhenghe, China's answer to Christopher Columbus, minus the whole discovering new continents thing. Zhenghe was a Muslim eunuch and admiral who led 7 epic voyages between 1405 and 1433, showcasing Chinese naval prowess in a way that would make Poseidon do a double take. These fleets weren't just any old maritime jaunts. They were floating cities, with ships measuring up to 400 feet long. That's longer than a football field. Folks, take that, Titanic. Zhenghe's expeditions took him to places like Southeast Asia, India, and even the east coast of Africa. The treasure fleets were less about trade and more about flexing imperial muscle. It was China's way of saying, check out our bling. They carried silk, porcelain, and other luxury goods, spreading Chinese culture and influence far and wide. But here's the kicker. The whole thing was less about economic gain and more about prestige. Zhenghe and his crew were the ancient equivalent of influencers, dropping into ports to spread the good word about the Ming Dynasty's awesomeness. However, just as you're getting ready to applaud this maritime marvel, here comes the twist. Despite the grandeur and success of these voyages, they ended with a bureaucratic shrug. The Ming court, with its conservative Confucian officials, decided that these treasure fleets were more trouble than they were worth. In a classic thanks, but no thanks moment, they axed the whole program, like cancelling a show after its peak season. The reasons were as varied as a box of fortune cookies. Some say it was due to costs, others blame internal politics, and still others point to a shift in focus towards internal priorities. Whatever the cause, the plug was pulled, and the ships were left to rot. This decision marked a turning point, a step away from maritime exploration just as it was gaining momentum. The irony. By turning inward, the Ming missed the boat, literally and figuratively, on global maritime dominance. While Europe was gearing up for its age of exploration, China was busy polishing its forbidden city. It's a bit like skipping out on a world tour because you'd rather stay home and rearrange your furniture. Back on land, the Ming Dynasty was experiencing its own cultural explosion, akin to a Renaissance fair on steroids. Art, literature, and philosophy flourished as the economy stabilized and wealth trickled down, though maybe not as much as the average peasant would have liked. The period saw the rise of porcelain production, with those iconic blue and white wares becoming the must-have items for anyone who was anyone. It was the Ming Dynasty's version of the iPhone, a status symbol that also happened to be quite handy. Literature, too, was having a moment. The Ming era gave us classics like Journey to the West and The Water Margin, stories that are as ingrained in Chinese culture as Shakespeare is in the West. These works were rich tapestries of myth and reality, much like the dynasty itself. They offered escapism and commentary, a reflection of the human condition wrapped in fantastical tales. Yet amidst this cultural cornucopia, the dichotomy of the Ming dynasty remained. Prosperity was real, but so were the social divides. The rich got richer, while the poor often found themselves stuck in the same rut. It's the age-old story of economic disparity, with the emperor and his court living in opulence, while the average farmer toiled to make ends meet. The tension between the classes simmered beneath the surface, a reminder that even in times of prosperity, not everyone gets a seat at the banquet. As the Ming dynasty continued its journey, it left behind a legacy of contradictions. It was a time of great achievement, but also of missed opportunities. While the Grand Canal and the treasure fleets showcased the heights of Chinese innovation, the inward turn of the empire hinted at a reluctance to embrace change. The Ming era, with all its splendor and flaws, set the stage for the next act in China's history, a tale that would continue to unfold in unexpected ways. As the Ming dynasty continued its journey, its cultural and social landscape was anything but stagnant. The era was like an elaborate tapestry, woven with threads of Confucian ideals, artistic innovation, and a healthy dose of class friction. If the Yuan dynasty was a chaotic abstract painting, the Ming was a return to traditional landscapes, albeit with some modern splashes here and there. The Confucian comeback during this period was akin to bell-bottom jeans making a sartorial return, familiar yet refreshed. Confucianism was the glue that held the Ming society together, or at least that was the idea. Zhu Yuanzhang and his successors embraced it like a comfort blanket, relying on its principles to shape governance and social norms. But let's not kid ourselves into believing it was all harmonious. The notion of a perfect Confucian society is as much a myth as unicorns or calorie-free cake. For starters, the Confucian ideal of a well-ordered society was more of a blueprint than a reality, with cracks in the facade that you'd need more than a little spackle to fix. The civil service exams were a prime example of this disconnect. These exams were the gateway to governmental positions, ostensibly open to anyone with the brains and the will to succeed. In theory, it was a meritocratic system that would make any modern HR department proud. But in practice, it was a grueling, soul-crushing ordeal that often favored those with the resources to afford tutors and time to study. Imagine spending years cramming Confucian classics, poetry, and policy, only to sit through an exam that could last up to 3 days. That's right, 3 days, long enough for any examinee to question their life choices. The exams were held in massive complexes, like the one in Nanjing, which could accommodate up to 20,000 candidates at once, each sequestered in tiny cubicles with nothing but ink, paper, and their wits. The pressure was immense, the competition fierce, and the chances of passing about as slim as a pencil. For the lucky few who did make it through, a career in the civil service awaited, with all the prestige and perks it entailed. For the rest, it was back to the drawing board, or plough, as the case may be. Yet, for all its faults, the exam system did result in a highly educated bureaucracy, one that was crucial for managing the vast empire. It was a double-edged sword, promoting intellectual achievement while perpetuating social inequalities. The exams epitomized the Confucian ideal of governance by the virtuous and learned, but they also highlighted the stark divide between the haves and the have-nots. While the mandarins were busy penning essays and quoting Confucius, the Ming dynasty's cultural scene was thriving. Art and literature reached new heights, with innovations that would leave a lasting impact. One of the most notable was the Ming obsession with porcelain. Yes, those delicate blue and white vases and bowls that now adorn museums and high-end dining tables across the globe were practically the Ming dynasty's calling card. Porcelain was the dynasty's pride and joy, much like Italy's love affair with fashion or France's dedication to fine wine. The kilns of Jingdezhen churned out these ceramic masterpieces by the thousands, each piece a testament to the skill and artistry of its creators. Yet, as with all obsessions, there was a downside. The demand for porcelain led to an industry that was both innovative and exploitative. Laborers toiled in the kilns, often under harsh conditions, to meet the insatiable appetite for these luxury goods. It was a porcelain fever, driven by both domestic and international markets, with pieces making their way as far as the Ottoman Empire and Europe. In literature, the Ming era was a golden age, with works that captured the imagination and moral dilemmas of the time. Journey to the West and The Water Margin weren't just stories, they were cultural phenomena, exploring themes of adventure, justice, and the human condition. These tales offered an escape from the harsh realities of life, while also providing a mirror to society's virtues and vices. The characters were as complex as the readers themselves, navigating a world as fraught with challenges as it was with opportunities. Despite the rich cultural tapestry, the Ming dynasty was not without its social tensions. Class struggles simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder that while the empire was grand, its people were not all living in harmony. The gentry and the wealthy merchants enjoyed lives of relative ease, their homes filled with art and luxury, while peasants labored in the fields, their lives dictated by the whims of nature and the demands of the state. It was a tale as old as time, the few reaping the benefits of the many. But let's not romanticize the plight of the peasantry without acknowledging the resilience and ingenuity that often emerged from it. Farmers developed sophisticated agricultural techniques, like crop rotation and fertilization, to maximize their yields. These innovations were vital for feeding a growing population and sustaining the empire's economy. The peasants themselves were a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt and persevere, even in the face of adversity. As the Ming dynasty moved forward, it carried with it the weight of its contradictions. A society striving for Confucian harmony, yet riddled with inequality. A culture that celebrated artistic achievement, yet relied on the labor of the many. An empire that looked inward just as the world was opening up. These tensions would continue to shape the course of the dynasty, setting the stage for future challenges and triumphs. As we delve deeper into the Ming era, we'll see how these dynamics played out, influencing not just the fate of the dynasty, but the course of Chinese history itself. And so, as the Ming dynasty sauntered through the pages of history with its tapestry of contradictions, it was about to hit the part of the story where things go from "we're on top of the world" to "Houston, we have a problem." Imagine an empire that had once been the toast of the town, now watching as it seems start to unravel quicker than a cheap sweater in a spin cycle. The decline of the Ming was as inevitable as a hangover after a night of cheap wine. Internal strife, fiscal mismanagement, and a healthy dose of corruption all played their parts. Let's start with a little fiscal fiasco. By the late Ming period, the imperial treasury was as empty as a teenager's fridge. And you can thank a combination of opulent spending by later emperors and a tax system that was about as efficient as a traffic jam. The dynasty's earlier penchant for frugality had given way to extravagance. The grandiose constructions and lavish lifestyles of the court drained resources faster than you can say silver shortage. Yes, silver was the currency of choice, and as international trade routes expanded, China found itself in a pickle. More silver was flowing out than coming in, leading to deflation that hit the economy like a ton of bricks. Prices plummeted, and suddenly everyone was clutching their purses, wondering how they'd afford their next bowl of rice. And then there was infighting, a classic human pastime that transcends time and culture. The Ming court was practically a soap opera with all the intrigue and backstabbing you could wish for. Eunuchs, those power-wielding courtiers who had the emperor's ear, and probably his paranoia, were often at odds with the Confucian scholars who ran the bureaucracy. They bickered over policies like kids, fighting over the TV remote, leaving the empire's governance in a state of chaos. The result? A leadership as divided as a pizza at a kid's birthday party, with no one able to get a grip on the mounting issues. Meanwhile, out beyond the ornate gates of the Forbidden City, external threats were knocking on China's door with the persistence of a salesman at dinner time. The Mongols, never ones to stay quiet for long, were back with a vengeance, eyeing their former stomping grounds. And let's not forget the Jurchens, who would later give rise to the Qing dynasty. waiting in the wings with ambitions as grand as the Mings were once upon a time. These external pressures were like wolves at the gate, ready to pounce on any sign of weakness, and weakness was showing in spades. Corruption, too, was spreading like a weed. Officials who were supposed to uphold the empire's integrity were lining their pockets instead. Bribery was rampant, and positions were often sold to the highest bidder, a practice that would make even the most ambitious Wall Street shark blush. This systemic corruption meant that the realm's needs were often ignored in favor of personal gain. The empire's resources frittered away, while the common folk bore the brunt of the inefficiencies. Amidst this turmoil, the dynasty's cultural and scientific achievements were often overshadowed by the political and economic turmoil. The Ming era was a bright spot for innovation and the arts, but like a painter working in the dark, its brilliance was often lost amidst the shadows of decline. The empire's inability to manage its wealth and resources effectively was a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the mightiest of dynasties could crumble if they didn't keep an eye on the bottom line. As the Ming dynasty's fortunes waned, the lessons of its rise and fall loomed large. It was a tale of ambition met with hubris, of potential squandered by mismanagement. Yet, despite its decline, the Ming left a legacy that was as indelible as the porcelain it produced. Its cultural contributions, from the elegance of its architecture to the depth of its literature, continued to influence generations long after its emperors had been deposed. The fall of the Ming dynasty also served as a stark reminder of the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise and fall, often for the same reasons: internal strife, economic mismanagement, and external pressures. It's a pattern as old as time, one that plays out again and again, with new players but the same script. And while it's easy to laugh at the absurdity of it all, at the emperors who thought themselves invincible and the officials who couldn't see the forest for the trees, it also speaks to the enduring nature of human folly. So, what do we take away from this grand narrative? That power is fleeting, that the art of governance requires both vision and vigilance, and that those who ignore history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. The Ming dynasty, with all its splendor and its flaws, serves as a potent reminder of these truths. It's a story that resonates through the ages, a testament to the heights of human achievement and the depths of human error. As we close this chapter on the Ming, it's worth reflecting on the absurdity and the grandeur that history offers. In the end, the tale of the Ming dynasty is not just a story of an empire's rise and fall, but a mirror held up to the perennial human struggle. It's a reminder that while we may laugh at the past, we are often living its lessons in real time. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the greatest legacy of all. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away. Just kidding, we're not diving into folklore here. This is the real deal. Feudal Japan, a place where samurai wielded swords with more names than a pop star's pets, and shoguns ruled like CEOs of a corporate empire. The years between the 12th and 19th centuries were a roller coaster of power plays, poetry, and more ceremonial tea than you'd find at a modern hipster cafe. Now, let's talk about the shogunate system, an administrative setup that could make Game of Thrones look like a kindergarten drama. The shogun was essentially the top dog, the military commander who held the real power, while the emperor was more of a spiritual mascot, a figurehead with as much political influence as a potted plant in the corner office. This was the era of bakufu, which literally means tent government. Yes, you heard it right, tent, because these guys were all about the mobile command center, ready to pack up and move if things got hairy. Consider the Kamakura shogunate, the first of its kind, established in 1192. Minamoto no Yoritomo was the inaugural shogun, and he didn't just stroll into the office, he fought his way there. Imagine a medieval version of corporate ladder climbing, except instead of PowerPoint presentations, you had sword fights. Yoritomo's regime set the precedent for a system where samurai, the warrior class, were not just muscle for hire, but also cultural icons. These guys didn't just know how to swing a katana, they could compose a haiku about cherry blossoms that would make your heart weep. But let's be real, The samurai life wasn't all moonlit duels and Zen gardens. Despite the romantic allure of the samurai code, or bushido, which emphasized honor, loyalty, and a good deal of stoic silence, the reality was much more bureaucratic. It was like office politics, but instead of passive-aggressive emails, you had actual battles and potential disembowelment. The samurai were expected to be the perfect blend of warrior and gentleman, which is like asking your IT guy to also be a motivational speaker. Samurai armor, by the way, was no joke. These guys weren't just prancing around in silk kimonos all day. They were decked out in gear weighing around 60 pounds, crafted meticulously from leather, iron, and silk. And this wasn't just any iron. It was the Tamahagane steel, folded and refolded up to 15 times for strength and flexibility. That's more folds than a chef's omelette. And while they were armor-clad titans on the battlefield, at home, they were more likely to be found penning poetry or practicing calligraphy, because nothing screams fearsome warrior like a beautiful cursive script. Speaking of paradoxes, the samurai weren't always about conflict. In fact, during the Edo period, 1603–1868, also known as the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan experienced over 250 years of relative peace. This era is sometimes referred to as the Great Peace, or Pax Tokugawa. The samurai found themselves in a bit of an existential crisis. With fewer battles to fight, they were like soldiers who suddenly found themselves with a lifetime gym membership and no war to train for. Many samurai turned to roles as bureaucrats or administrators, channeling their discipline into governance rather than warfare. The economics of this feudal system were as complex as a Sudoku puzzle on expert mode. The daimyo, or feudal lords, were like regional managers under the shogun's corporate umbrella. They controlled the land and the peasants who worked it. And let's not forget that rice was the currency of the realm. Yes, rice, not gold, not silver. Imagine trying to pay your rent in grains. It sounds absurd today, but back then it was the norm. A daimyo's wealth was measured in koku, a unit of rice, with one koku being enough to feed one person for a year. That's a lot of sushi. Now, let's debunk a myth that's as pervasive as Wi-Fi. The notion that samurai were constantly engaged in epic duels. The truth: samurai were more likely to die from disease or political intrigue than in glorious combat. The romantic vision of samurai clashes, akin to a medieval action movie, was largely a product of later dramatizations. In reality, the samurai's life was a dance of diplomacy, administration, and yes, occasionally dealing with the odd rebellion or invasion. And while we're myth-busting, let's address the notion that samurai were always the epitome of loyalty and honor. The truth is, loyalty often depended on who was holding the purse strings. Samurai would switch allegiances if it meant a better gig, a reality not unlike today's job market, where loyalty is sometimes just a LinkedIn connection away. The shogunate system, with its intricate web of power dynamics, was a balancing act. Shoguns had to keep the daimyo in check, often through a system called sankinkotai, or alternate attendance, which required daimyo to spend part of the year in Edo, modern-day Tokyo, under the watchful eye of the shogunate. This was like a medieval version of a corporate retreat, except you couldn't just zoom in. You physically had to be there, or else. In the grand tapestry of history, feudal Japan stands out for its unique blend of militant discipline and artistic sophistication. It was a world where the pen was often mightier than the sword, unless you were in actual combat, in which case the sword definitely had the upper hand. The samurai and shoguns crafted a legacy that continues to captivate the imagination, both the romantic legends and the gritty realities. As we peel back the layers of this fascinating era, remember, behind every myth is a truth waiting to be discovered, often stranger and more compelling than the fiction. Now, as we wade deeper into the quagmire of feudal Japan's economic ecosystem, let's talk about how the samurai lifestyle was funded. Spoiler alert, it wasn't through lucrative brand deals or selling merch. The economy of feudal Japan was a curious beast, with rice as its lifeblood. That's right, rice wasn't just a side dish. It was the main course of currency. The samurai might have had swords sharp enough to split hairs, but it was rice that truly fueled their existence. Picture this. A samurai's wealth was measured in koku, essentially a year's worth of rice for one person. It was a system that made paying your taxes feel like a very intense episode of Iron Chef. The daimyo, those powerful lords with territories as sprawling as their ambition, collected taxes not in coins, but in grains. This wasn't just a quaint tradition, it was the backbone of their economic power. A well-off daimyo might oversee lands producing tens of thousands of koku. But before you start romanticizing this agrarian utopia, remember that the peasant farmers were the ones planting, harvesting, and toiling away in the fields. The samurai might have been the face of the operation, but the peasants were its calloused hands. And speaking of peasants, let's debunk another myth. They weren't just passive serfs quietly tilling the land. In fact, peasants made up about 90% of the population, and they were the engine driving the feudal machine. While they lived under the watchful eyes of their daimyo, these farmers had a complicated relationship with their overlords. Sure, they were subject to heavy taxation and often lived on the brink of subsistence, but they also held a certain power. After all, no rice, no samurai. It was a precarious balance, like a medieval version of supply chain management, where one bad harvest could send ripples through the entire system. Merchants, meanwhile, occupied a fascinating niche in this hierarchy. Despite their critical role in trade and commerce, they were often looked down upon by the samurai, who considered them a necessary but morally suspect part of society. The samurai believed in a world where honor was the ultimate currency, making the merchants' pursuit of profit seem a bit gauche by comparison. And yet, in the grand irony of feudal Japan, these same merchants would often become incredibly wealthy, sometimes even richer than the samurai themselves. It was a classic case of do as I say, not as I do, with samurai relying on the very commerce they claimed to disdain to fund their elaborate lifestyles. Maintaining the image of a samurai wasn't cheap. High-quality armor, weapons, and those picturesque estates didn't just manifest out of thin air. A samurai's gear alone could cost the equivalent of a small fortune. We're talking about armor meticulously crafted from iron and lacquer, swords forged in a process requiring as much artistry as it did metallurgy. And let's not forget the ceremonial tea sets, calligraphy supplies, and the occasional extravagant festival, because nothing says I'm a serious warrior like a well-choreographed tea ceremony. The economic realities of sustaining such a lifestyle meant that many samurai were in a constant state of financial juggling. They were like the original gig workers, sometimes supplementing their income through side hustles in administration or as tutors. For the more enterprising samurai, these roles provided a stable income and a way to justify their existence in a world that was increasingly less reliant on martial prowess. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the tatami room. Land ownership. Land wasn't just a plot of earth to grow rice. It was the ultimate status symbol, the key to power and influence. The feudal system functioned on a simple premise: control the land, control the people. The daimyo, therefore, were like landlords on steroids, wielding both economic and political power within their domains. They were responsible for the welfare of their territories, which meant keeping their samurai well-fed and ready for action, or more likely, for bureaucratic duties in the peaceable Edo period. The shogunate's clever use of land distribution kept the daimyo in check. Through a system of rewards and punishments, the shogun could grant or revoke lands, keeping any overly ambitious daimyo from getting too comfortable. It was a delicate balancing act, maintaining a patchwork of allegiances that held the entire structure together like a well-tied kimono. But beneath this intricate web of land and loyalty lay a more grounded reality: the day-to-day survival of commoners, who worked tirelessly to sustain the upper echelons of this feudal hierarchy. While the samurai and daimyo were busy with their swordplay and politics, peasants were in the fields, merchants were in the markets, and life went on in a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the whims of their rulers. In essence, the feudal system was like a massive, complex game of Jenga. Each piece, from the peasants at the base to the shogun at the top, was crucial to its stability. As we continue to unspool this tangled history, remember that while the myths of samurai honor and shogun power are captivating, the reality was a lot messier, and dare I say, even more interesting. The stage is set for more intrigue and drama as we continue to peel back the layers of this fascinating era. Hold onto your katanas, because we're just getting started. As we venture further into the labyrinthine corridors of samurai lore, let's peel away the glossy veneer of Bushido, the famed way of the warrior that supposedly had samurai sleeping with honor under their pillows. Spoiler alert. The reality was more like a corporate handbook than a sacred scroll. Bushido, in its idealized form, was all about loyalty, duty, and a dash of existential dread. But in practice, it was as flexible as an acrobat on a trampoline, often bent to fit the whims of those wielding the power. Take, for instance, the story of Eiichai Mitsuhide, the infamous samurai who decided that his boss, Oda Nobunaga, needed an early retirement via assassination in 1582. Nobunaga, a prominent daimyo, was on the verge of uniting Japan under his rule. But Mitsuhide, seeing an opportunity for a career change that even LinkedIn would envy, turned on his employer in what's known as the incident at Hanoji. And why not? Nobunaga was a demanding boss who had a penchant for pushing his staff to the brink. Mitsuhide's betrayal wasn't just a blip in the history of Japanese loyalty. It was a neon sign flashing that samurai weren't above swapping allegiances when it suited their personal ambitions. The truth is, samurai loyalty was often more transactional than the romanticized tales suggest. Much like a modern-day job hopper looking for the best benefits package, samurai would weigh their options, sometimes jumping ship for a better offer. This was especially true when a daimyo's fortunes took a nosedive, and samurai found themselves having to choose between loyalty and the very pragmatic need to keep rice on the table. In this era, loyalty often had a price tag, and it was paid in koku, not kudos. Speaking of economics, the financial pressures facing samurai were no small potatoes, or rather, no small bowls of rice. As we mentioned, a samurai's wealth was often measured in koku, with their livelihoods heavily reliant on their daimyo's ability to manage and protect their lands. During times of peace, which were surprisingly frequent during the Edo period, samurai had to justify their existence beyond the battlefield. They became bureaucrats, teachers, and sometimes even artists, all roles that, while less glamorous than sword fighting, paid the bills. It's a bit like asking a modern-day action hero to take up a desk job. It might not be as thrilling, but it gets the groceries. The myth of samurai as unswervingly honorable warriors is further complicated by the reality of their personal interests and ambitions. Take the case of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a samurai who rose from humble beginnings to become one of Japan's greatest unifiers. Hideyoshi was as shrewd as they come, using both his martial prowess and his uncanny ability to navigate the social and political landscapes of the time. He exemplified the samurai's adaptability, showing that the path to power was paved not just with courage, but with cunning, negotiation, and occasionally a strategic marriage or two. Now, let's talk about Bushido as a code of conduct. It wasn't even officially codified until the Edo period, long after many of the legendary samurai tales had been spun. In fact, much of what we think of as Bushido was a product of Edwira scholars and warriors romanticizing the past, crafting a narrative that fit the peaceful times they found themselves in. It's like looking back at the Wild West from the comfort of a modern metropolis and waxing poetic about cowboy ethics. Sure, there was a code, but it was more of a guideline than an unbreakable law. Bushido, in many ways, served as a cultural glue, a way for samurai to maintain a sense of identity and purpose in a rapidly changing world. It was about as rigid as a rubber band, stretching to accommodate the needs of those who invoked it. Much like today's corporate mission statements, which can range from genuinely inspiring to utterly baffling, Bushido was used to justify everything from extreme loyalty to outright betrayal. It was, in essence, a toolkit for navigating the often treacherous waters of feudal Japanese society. And let's not overlook the economic motivations lurking beneath the surface of samurai allegiance. During peacetime, samurai needed to find ways to sustain themselves and their families, leading many to engage in side gigs. Think of it as the original gig economy. These extra roles weren't just about making ends meet. They were crucial for maintaining social status and influence. For some, it was a matter of survival, while for others, it was a chance to expand their power base and secure a future in an uncertain world. This brings us to the modern parallel of corporate loyalty programs, where employees are wooed with perks, bonuses, and the occasional pizza party. Much like samurai, today's workers are often caught between loyalty to their employer and the pursuit of better opportunities. The allure of a more lucrative position can be as tempting now as it was then, with loyalty sometimes taking a backseat to personal advancement. In the end, the myth of the samurai as paragons of virtue and unwavering loyalty is just that, a myth. The reality was far more complex, with samurai navigating a world where power and wealth often dictated the terms of loyalty. As we continue to unravel the intricacies of samurai life, it's essential to remember that behind every legend lies a tapestry of human ambition, frailty, and the ever-present struggle to balance honor with reality. So, as we move forward in our exploration of feudal Japan, keep in mind that the samurai's storied past is as much about navigating the murky waters of power dynamics as it is about swinging swords. In the grand narrative of history, fact and fiction often dance together, creating a legacy that's as fascinating as it is flawed. Stay tuned, because the saga of samurai and shoguns is far from over, and the plot is about to thicken. As we move deeper into the political labyrinth of the shogunate, it becomes increasingly clear that feudal Japan was less a noble paradise of honor-bound warriors, and more a high-stakes chess game played with real swords and even sharper intrigue. Picture this, a world where allegiances shifted as quickly as the cherry blossoms fell, and where the only constant was the looming shadow of betrayal. It's like a soap opera set in the samurai era, complete with plot twists that would make even the most seasoned Netflix screenwriter raise an eyebrow. Let's start with the Ashikaga shogunate, 1336–1573, a period where the political drama was as thick as the fog over Mount Fuji. The Ashikaga clan came to power through a series of coups and battles that would give even the most ruthless corporate raider a run for their money. These guys turned political backstabbing into an art form. Take Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, the third shogun, who managed to broker peace among warring factions not just with military might, but with a savvy blend of diplomacy and strategic marriages. His court was a revolving door of alliances and betrayals, a place where loyalty was as fleeting as a summer breeze. One of the most notorious episodes of betrayal occurred during the Onin War, 1467–1477, a conflict that began as a succession dispute but quickly spiraled into a full-blown civil war that lasted a decade. It was like the 100 Years' War condensed into a pressure cooker of chaos. The war left Kyoto, the capital at the time, in ruins and set the stage for the Sengoku period, a century of nearly constant civil war. During this time, daimyos were like regional warlords, each vying for control, and alliances were about as stable as a house of cards. Samurai pledged their swords to whichever lord promised the best chance of survival and reward. It was a ruthless game of musical chairs, and when the music stopped, you didn't want to be left standing. Speaking of shaky alliances, let's not forget the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, a clash that featured more plot twists than a season finale of your favorite drama series. The battle was essentially the climax of the Sengoku period, with Tokugawa Ieyasu emerging victorious and establishing the Tokugawa shogunate. But this wasn't a straightforward path to power. Ieyasu had to navigate through a minefield of betrayals, including that of Ishida Mitsunari, who had once been his ally. Mitsunari gathered a coalition of lords, hoping to topple Ieyasu and claim power for himself. However, the tides turned when some of Mitsunari's allies switched sides mid-battle, leading to his defeat. It was a classic case of with friends like these, who needs enemies? The Tokugawa shogunate, which lasted until 1868, brought about a period of relative peace and stability known as the Edo period. But don't let the serene ukiyo-e paintings fool you. The political machinations continued unabated. The shogunate maintained its grip on power through a delicate balance of fear and favor, using a system called sankinkotai. This alternate attendance policy required daimyos to spend every other year at the shogun's court in Edo, modern-day Tokyo. It was a masterstroke of political control, keeping potential rivals under the watchful eye of the shogunate while simultaneously draining them of resources. Imagine having to maintain two households, one in your domain and the other in Edo, each lavish enough to display your loyalty and wealth. It was a financial burden designed to keep the daimyos too busy balancing their books to plot rebellion. Now let's bust another bubble. The idea that samurai and shoguns were paragons of virtue, untouched by corruption. In reality, the shogunate system was rife with bribery and favoritism. Samurai were often more concerned with increasing their own status and wealth than with any lofty ideals of Bushido. Case in point, the practice of jiri and ninjo, which roughly translates to the obligations of duty versus the desires of the heart. Samurai often found themselves navigating these conflicting demands, sometimes resorting to less than honorable means to satisfy both. It's a bit like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. One wrong move, and it all comes crashing down. The economic realities of the shogunate were also far from idyllic. While the Tokugawa period was marked by peace, it was also a time of rigid social hierarchy and economic stagnation for many. The merchant class, officially the lowest in the social order, paradoxically became increasingly powerful due to their control of commerce and finance. Samurai, despite their high status, often found themselves financially strapped, relying on stipends that didn't always cover their expenses. Some samurai even resorted to taking loans from the very merchants they looked down upon, a real-life twist of irony that would make any playwright proud. The romanticized image of samurai as stoic, battle-ready warriors doesn't hold up against the reality of their roles during the Edo period. With fewer wars to fight, many samurai became bureaucrats, managing the day-to-day affairs of their domains. It was less about swinging swords and more about stamping papers and managing peasant uprisings. The samurai class had to adapt to a world where their martial skills were less relevant, leading to a complex identity crisis. They were like rock stars who suddenly had to trade their guitars for spreadsheets. The shogunate's power was further strained by external pressures. By the mid-19th century, the arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships forced Japan to open its doors to the world, ending centuries of isolation. The shogunate's inability to deal effectively with foreign powers and internal dissent led to its eventual downfall. The Meiji Restoration in 1868 marked the end of the shogunate and the beginning of a new era, one where the samurai class was abolished, and Japan embarked on a rapid modernization journey. In this historical narrative, the romantic legends of noble warriors and wise shoguns often overshadow the gritty reality of political maneuvering and economic hardship. Yet it's these very contradictions that make the history of feudal Japan so compelling. Behind every myth lies a story of human ambition, resilience, and the eternal struggle for power. As we continue to delve into the complexities of this fascinating era, remember that the truth is often stranger and more intriguing than fiction. The tale of samurai and shoguns is far from finished, so stay tuned for more twists and turns in this epic saga. So here we are, standing at the precipice of the samurai era's grand finale, a historical drama that makes Game of Thrones look like a school play. Enter the Meiji Restoration of 1868, a seismic shift that gave the samurai class the cultural equivalent of a pink slip. Imagine if Batman showed up one day and said, "Thanks for your service, but Gotham's going green, so we're switching to drones." Just like that, centuries of samurai tradition were appended faster than you can say Bushido. The Meiji Restoration marked the end of the Tokugawa shogunate, a regime that had ruled with an iron fan for over 250 years. The emperor, who had been about as politically relevant as a garden gnome, suddenly found himself back in charge. This period of rapid modernization saw Japan transforming from a feudal society into an industrial powerhouse. Out with the old, in with the new, railways, telegraphs, and Western fashion flooded in, and the samurai class found themselves as relevant as a blockbuster card in the age of Netflix. Now let's dig into the nitty-gritty. The Meiji government, in an effort to centralize power and streamline governance, abolished the feudal domains and replaced them with prefectures. Samurai stipends, which were essentially lifetime salaries paid in rice, were converted into government bonds, a financial move that seemed about as stable as a house built on sand. Many samurai, unfamiliar with this newfangled system of economics, quickly found themselves in dire straits. It's like handing a medieval knight a credit card statement. The concept was alien and not exactly in their wheelhouse. By 1876, the carrying of swords was banned, a move that was essentially like telling rock stars they couldn't play guitars anymore. The samurai class, which had once been the epitome of Japanese culture, was now scrambling to find new roles in this rapidly modernizing society. Some became entrepreneurs, others took on roles in the military or government, and a few even ventured abroad to study Western technologies. They were like the original startup founders, pivoting faster than a Silicon Valley app developer. But here's the kicker. While samurai were being shown the exit, their ideals were getting a shiny makeover. The Meiji leaders co-opted Bushido, repackaging it as a national ethic to inspire loyalty and sacrifice among the populace. It was the ultimate PR move, turning a class-based warrior code into a universal national ethos. Bushido became the backbone of Japan's military propaganda, a way to foster a sense of unity and identity in a rapidly changing society. The samurai might have been gone, but their spirit was woven into the very fabric of modern Japan. Fast forward to today, and you'll find samurai imagery splashed across everything from anime to action movies. These warriors have been commodified into symbols of honor, strength, and discipline, even if the historical reality was more bureaucratic than badass. The Hollywood samurai, with their stoic gazes and perfect swordplay, are about as accurate as a GPS in a tunnel. The appeal lies in the myth, not the mundane reality of managing rice taxes and negotiating feudal politics. Yet, there's something undeniably magnetic about the samurai legend. Perhaps it's the allure of a simpler time when honor was supposedly clear-cut, unlike the murky waters of modern ethics. Or maybe it's the romanticized notion of a warrior's life, filled with valor and poetry. We humans have a tendency to cling to narrative simplicity, even when reality is as tangled as a bowl of ramen noodles. The samurai's enduring legacy is a testament to our love for stories that transcend time, even if those stories are more fiction than fact. The real history of the samurai is a complex tapestry of ambition, adaptation, and survival. They were not just warriors. They were poets, politicians, and ultimately people navigating the treacherous waters of their era. As we wrap up our journey through the annals of feudal Japan, let's tip our hats, or helmets, to the samurai and shoguns who shaped a nation. Their tales are as compelling as they are contradictory, a blend of myth and reality that continues to captivate our imagination. So the next time you see a samurai on screen or hear the swish of a katana, remember, behind every legend is a story both stranger and more human than we often care to admit. And isn't that, in itself, the greatest story of all? In the bustling chaos of the Lu state, circa 551 BCE, a certain baby boy entered the world under a sky that was probably just as cloudy with political dust as it was with actual, clouds. This newborn was Confucius, a name that would eventually become synonymous with wisdom, but at the time was just another kid crying for attention while the adults around him were too busy bickering over power to notice. Though it might seem like Confucius popped into a philosophical utopia, the reality was far from peaceful. The Lu state was a hotbed of political shenanigans, where rulers changed faster than you'd swipe left on a bad Tinder match. Confucius's family background was a cocktail of intriguing contradictions. His father, Xu Lianghe, was a seasoned warrior, a sort of ancient action hero, who had fallen out of favor in the political arena. Despite his super-soldier credentials, he was politically sidelined, maybe for being too much of a straight shooter in a world that adored playing crooked games. Now, Xu Liang was quite the older gentleman when he married Confucius's mother, Yan Zhengzai, who was a teenager at the time. Yes, you heard that right. The age gap was as wide as the Great Wall would be centuries later. But hey, in a world where marriages were strategic alliances rather than romantic comedies, this was just another Tuesday. Now, growing up in such a household might seem like a recipe for an identity crisis, but it actually laid the groundwork for Confucius's insatiable thirst for knowledge. While other kids were playing with sticks and rocks, Confucius was probably pondering the moral implications of rock, paper, scissors. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but his early years were steeped in learning. With a father who was a living legend, and a mother who was likely wise beyond her years, Confucius had front-row seats to a masterclass in life's complexities. Around this time, education wasn't exactly a walk in the park. In fact, it was more like a crawl through a dense forest of Confucian classics that didn't exist yet. But Confucius was a trailblazer, often seen with his nose buried in texts whenever he could get his hands on them. It seems he had a penchant for diving into the annals of history, law, and ritual, much like how we binge-watch true crime documentaries today. And why not? The socio-political landscape of Lu provided enough drama to fill several seasons of a Netflix series. The state of Lu, despite its political turbulence, was a fertile ground for philosophical inquiry. Think of it as a pressure cooker for ideas, where the chaos actually sparked creativity. Confucius was like a sponge, soaking up the wisdom of the ages while pondering how it all fit into the messy puzzle of human existence. The young philosopher was driven by a vision of harmony, dreaming of a world where leaders led with virtue rather than vanity. If only he had a Twitter account, right? Virtue over vanity might have been trending. The philosopher-to-be was also shaped by the socio-economic conditions of his time. The disparity between the haves and the have-nots was as glaring as a midday sun in the desert. Confucius could see the cracks in society's foundation, and he was determined to do more than just point them out. He wanted to fix them. This passion for social reform was not just an academic exercise for him. It was a personal mission, a calling that would drive him throughout his life. But let's not romanticize this too much. Confucius's early years weren't just a smooth ride on the wisdom highway. He faced his share of hardships, financial constraints being one of them. It's said that his family wasn't exactly rolling in ancient currency, which might have been a blessing in disguise. It forced him to value education and virtue over wealth, a theme that would become central to his teachings. So, here we have young Confucius, a product of political chaos, a unique family dynamic, and an education system that was more of a self-directed project than a structured curriculum. With a mind as curious as a detective and a heart as determined as an activist, Confucius was on a path to reshape the philosophical landscape. Little did he know, his ideas would resonate across millennia, lighting the way for generations to come. But that's a tale for another time, as we're just getting started with the early chapters of his life. As Confucius entered adulthood, he found himself navigating the convoluted corridors of bureaucracy in the state of Lu. Imagine this. A young, idealistic philosopher stepping into a world of red tape and ink-stained scrolls, where ambition often collided with reality, producing a cacophony of frustration. His first gig, a low-level bureaucrat. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of an entry-level position in middle management, complete with all the existential dread and paper-pushing that entails. Now, the Lu state wasn't exactly rolling in prosperity. Economically, it was more like a leaky ship in a turbulent sea. Picture a state with an economy so wobbly, it made the Tower of Pisa look like a paragon of stability. Agriculture was the backbone, but it was a shaky one, frequently suffering from the whims of weather and war. The rulers were as adept at mismanaging the economy as they were at playing political hopscotch, hopping from one crisis to another with little regard for the common folk who bore the brunt of their incompetence. Confucius took up his role with the determination of a visionary, convinced he could change the world with a well-placed memo. But quickly, he discovered that the bureaucratic machine was less about wise governance and more about keeping the gears of power turning smoothly, often at the expense of integrity. His job involved overseeing the granary, ensuring that the state's rice reserves didn't mysteriously vanish like socks in a dryer. A noble task, but one that opened his eyes to the deep-seated corruption eating away at the state's foundations. The young philosopher soon found that his salary was as meager as the moral compass of some of his superiors. It wasn't long before he faced a pivotal moment, a disagreement over pay that would lead to his infamous resignation. Was he a man of principle, unwilling to compromise his values for a few extra coins, or simply fed up with the bureaucratic circus? Perhaps both. The reality was that Confucius believed in fair compensation, not just as a personal gripe, but as a reflection of a society that valued virtue over vice. And let's be real here. Confucius's resignation wasn't just about the silver in his pocket. It was a statement, a philosophical mic drop in the face of an establishment that treated integrity like an optional accessory. His departure was a thunderous echo in the halls of power, a reminder that even in a world obsessed with material wealth, there were those who valued moral rectitude above all. But why was Confucius so adamant about preaching a return to moral integrity? Well, the state of loose governance was about as organized as a toddler's art project. Power was fragmented, divided among noble families who were more interested in feathering their nests than in serving the public good. Corruption was rampant, and nepotism was practically a family tradition. Confucius saw the rulers of Lu as more concerned with their own prestige than with the welfare of the people, a classic case of style over substance. He dreamed of a society where leaders were chosen for their virtue rather than their lineage, a meritocracy instead of an aristocracy. This wasn't just pie-in-the-sky idealism. Confucius had a practical streak, advocating for policies that would stabilize the economy and promote social welfare. He was all about reforming the tax system, ensuring that the burden didn't fall disproportionately on the poor, and creating a more equitable distribution of resources. Radical ideas, to be sure, but ones rooted in a desire for a fairer, more harmonious society. Confucius's philosophy was a direct response to the economic realities of his time. The gap between the rich and the poor was as glaring as the midday sun, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a few while the masses toiled in poverty. It was a familiar story, one that's echoed throughout history, from the Roman Empire to the Roaring Twenties, and even today. Confucius recognized the corrosive effect this disparity had on social cohesion, and sought to remedy it through ethical governance and moral leadership. His teachings emphasized the importance of personal development and ethical behavior, not just for rulers but for everyone. He believed that a society could only be as virtuous as its citizens, a philosophy that placed the onus of moral responsibility on each individual. In a world where leaders were often seen as demigods, Confucius was advocating for a radical shift, a society where moral integrity was the highest virtue, transcending wealth, power, and prestige. So there he was, a former bureaucrat turned philosopher, walking away from the corridors of power with his head held high and a vision for a better world. Confucius's resignation wasn't just a personal decision. It was a powerful statement, a declaration of independence from a system he saw as fundamentally flawed. His journey was far from over, and as he set out to spread his teachings, he carried with him a message that would resonate across the ages, a call for a return to virtue, a plea for integrity in an era of corruption. Confucius's story, then, is not just one of philosophical musings, but a tale of practical wisdom in the face of systemic failure. His life is a testament to the power of ideas, the belief that even in a world of chaos and corruption, one person's vision can spark a revolution of thought. As we continue to explore his journey, we'll see how his teachings evolved, how they challenged the status quo, and how they continue to inspire us to strive for a world where virtue is not just an ideal, but a reality. But that's a story for another day, as the saga of Confucius is far from finished. Having walked away from the bureaucratic carnival of the loose state with his integrity intact and his pockets as empty as a philosopher's fridge, Confucius embarked on a new chapter, the life of a wandering sage. Armed with nothing but his ideals and a desire to reshape society, he set out like an ancient influencer, ready to spread his reformative gospel across the Chinese states. But unlike today's Insta gurus who peddle smoothies and life hacks, Confucius was offering something a bit more substantial: wisdom. The irony: most of the feudal lords he encountered were as interested in wisdom as a cat is in a bath. Now, let's be clear. Confucius wasn't just aimlessly wandering like a tourist lost without Google Maps. He had a mission, a grand vision of moral leadership and societal harmony, and he believed it was his duty to share this vision. His journey took him through various states, each with its own flavor of political dysfunction, like a buffet of bad governance. From Wei to Song, Chen to Kai, Confucius was on a diplomatic road trip, hoping to find a lord who would listen to his ideas on virtue and governance. But for most of these rulers, the allure of expanding their territories through warfare was far more tantalizing than the promise of a well-governed state. Talk about a tough crowd. Confucius's attempts to find employment were met with a mix of indifference and skepticism. Imagine trying to sell ice to a snowman. That's about how receptive these lords were to his teachings. They were more interested in stockpiling weapons than wisdom, more focused on the battlefield than the philosopher's scroll. And let's not forget the economic backdrop. These states were embroiled in constant warfare, draining their coffers like a leaky bucket. The cost of war was astronomical, with armies needing funding that could rival a modern-day blockbuster movie budget. Who had the time or resources to invest in philosophical ponderings when there were battles to be fought and territories to be gained? But Confucius was undeterred. He traveled with a small band of disciples, his loyal entourage who believed in his vision even if the feudal lords didn't. They were like a group of philosophical rock stars, minus the groupies and electric guitars. Instead, they carried scrolls and engaged in deep discussions on ethics and morality. Confucius's teachings emphasized the importance of personal virtue and moral rectitude, concepts that were as rare in the courts of these warlords as a peaceful resolution. He taught that a ruler should lead by example, embodying the virtues he wished to see in his subjects. It was a radical idea, one that challenged the status quo of leadership by brute force and nepotism. Despite his lack of success in securing a stable position, Confucius's reputation grew. His teachings began to spread, not just through his own efforts, but through the work of his students. This was the era of oral tradition, where knowledge was passed down through dialogue and discourse. Confucius himself didn't write down his teachings, but his disciples meticulously recorded his sayings and conversations, creating texts that would become foundational to Chinese philosophy. The most famous of these is the Analects, a collection of Confucius's thoughts compiled by his followers. It's like the original self-help book, offering insights on everything from governance to personal conduct. Yet, during his lifetime, Confucius's ideas were more often dismissed than embraced. He was like an indie band with a cult following, but no mainstream success, appreciated by a niche audience, but largely ignored by the broader political sphere. The feudal lords were too caught up in their power struggles to realize the potential of his teachings. They saw him as a quaint idealist, a dreamer whose head was in the clouds while their feet were firmly planted on the battlefield. But Confucius was undeterred by their lack of interest. He believed that his ideas would eventually take root, even if he wouldn't live to see it. And here's an interesting tidbit. Despite his lack of direct political influence, Confucius's teachings gradually began to permeate the cultural fabric. His ideas on filial piety, the importance of family, and respect for elders resonated with the common people. These values became deeply ingrained in the societal norms of China. influencing everything from family life to government policies. It's a testament to the power of his philosophy that even without the backing of the ruling elite, Confucius's teachings found their way into the hearts and minds of the people. Confucius's journey as a wandering teacher was not without its challenges. He faced hardships, including periods of poverty and even danger. At one point, he and his disciples were stranded in the state of Chen, surrounded by hostile forces and cut off from supplies. It was a test of endurance and faith, but Confucius remained steadfast. He saw these trials not as obstacles, but as opportunities to practice the virtues he preached. In times of adversity, his teachings on resilience and moral fortitude became more than just words. They were a way of life. So, as Confucius wandered from state to state, spreading his philosophy like seeds on the wind, he was laying the groundwork for a legacy that would outlast the feudal lords who ignored him. His journey was a testament to the power of ideas, the belief that even in a world obsessed with power and conquest, there was a place for wisdom and virtue. As we follow the path of this wandering sage, we see not just a man ahead of his time, but a thinker whose ideas continue to shape the world long after his footsteps have faded. Confucius's story is far from over. As we continue to explore the life and teachings of this remarkable philosopher, we'll delve deeper into the texts and ideas attributed to him, examining how they were received or ignored during his lifetime and beyond. For while Confucius may have wandered without finding a home in the courts of power, his teachings found a lasting place in the annals of history, a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge us today. But that's a tale for another time, as the journey of Confucius, the wandering sage, is still unfolding. As the curtain began to fall on Confucius's life journey, he found himself back in his homeland of Lu, circa 484 BCE. Now, it might be tempting to picture him as a weary sage, sitting cross-legged under a tree, offering pearls of wisdom to an adoring crowd. But let's not get too carried away with the Hollywood version. The reality was a bit less glamorous. Confucius was indeed respected, but he was also a man who had faced his share of setbacks, including political snubs and philosophical indifference. Yet, he remained committed to his vision of a society governed by virtue, a dream that could have been filed under fantasy in the political climate of the day. By the time the philosopher shuffled off this mortal coil in 479 BCE, he was around 73 years old. And if you think that's ancient by today's standards, remember that back then, making it past 50 was an achievement worthy of a medal. So, kudos to Confucius for sticking around long enough to see some of his ideas take root, even if they didn't bloom quite as he might have hoped during his lifetime. Now, let's talk about the myth of his lonely demise. The romanticized version paints him as a solitary figure, abandoned by the world he tried to enlighten. But that's more melodrama than reality. Sure, Confucius didn't get the political clout he might have dreamt of, but to say he was alone is to overlook the community of disciples he left behind, an ancient version of a fan club, minus the merch. These followers, numbering around 3,000 if historical records are to be believed, were far from aimless wanderers. They were the torchbearers of his philosophy, passing down his teachings like oral tradition's version of a viral TikTok. Among these disciples were notable figures like Zhengzi, who would later become a philosopher in his own right, and Yan Hui, Confucius's favorite student, whose untimely death at 41 was a blow to the old master. This community wasn't just a group of eager listeners. They were active participants, engaging with and expanding upon Confucius's ideas. But after Confucius's death, his teachings faced a bit of a cold shoulder from the political elite. Imagine showing up to a party with your latest philosophical mixtape, only to find everyone's more interested in the DJ spinning power-hungry anthems. The Warring States period, which followed Confucius's time, was a chaotic free-for-all where might often made right, and the subtleties of ethical governance were consigned to the backseat, if not entirely thrown out of the philosophical car. This sidelining wasn't just a case of oops, we forgot about Confucius. The political landscape was shifting faster than a soap opera's plot twists. The Zhou dynasty's hold was weakening, leading to a fragmented China where 7 major states were battling it out like contestants on a particularly aggressive reality show. In such a milieu, Confucian ideals of harmony and virtue seemed as out of place as a pacifist at a boxing match. Yet, Confucius's ideas didn't vanish into the ether. His disciples continued to champion his vision, writing down his teachings, which would later form the Analects. This text is like the ultimate philosophical mixtape, capturing the essence of Confucius's thoughts in a series of quotable lines that have more staying power than a pop culture catchphrase. And while it might not have been an instant bestseller in the power halls of the period, it slowly gained traction among scholars and common folk alike. The real kicker: Confucius's teachings on governance, ethics, and personal virtue eventually became the philosophical bedrock of Chinese civil service. Fast forward a century or so, and the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, decided that Confucius was onto something. They adopted his ideas as the backbone of their bureaucratic system, effectively turning his philosophy into a state-sponsored ideology. Talk about a posthumous comeback. It's as if a cult classic film suddenly became a box office hit decades after its release. Economically, Confucius's ideas were equally profound. His emphasis on fair governance and ethical leadership hinted at a more sustainable societal model, one that valued equitable resource distribution over the chaotic scramble for power. Imagine a world where tax reforms and social welfare were guided by virtue rather than convenience. Sounds like utopia, right? Well, Confucius thought so too, and it's a vision that continues to resonate, even in today's complex socio-economic landscapes. So, while Confucius might have left this world without the fanfare that often accompanies legendary figures, his legacy was far from a footnote in the annals of history. He left behind a thriving intellectual community that carried his torch through the tumultuous seas of political upheaval. His teachings, initially dismissed by the power-hungry warlords of his time, would eventually shape the moral and ethical framework of future dynasties. In the end, Confucius's life is a testament to the enduring power of ideas. He didn't need grandiose titles or political power to leave an indelible mark on history. All he needed was a vision of a better world and the tenacity to share it, despite the odds stacked against him. As we continue to explore his journey, we'll uncover more layers of his philosophy, examining how it evolved and adapted to the changing tides of history. But that's a story for another day, as the legacy of Confucius continues to unfold across the centuries. As Confucius's teachings began to take root, they slowly morphed into the intellectual backbone of China, like that underdog band finally getting a record deal after years of playing in dive bars. Fast forward to the Han Dynasty, and we see Confucianism stepping into the spotlight as the philosophical darling of the imperial court. Picture it. The Han rulers, known for their administrative savvy, saw in Confucianism a tool to legitimize their reign with its emphasis on hierarchy, order, and ethical governance. This was a dynasty that ruled from 206 BCE to 220 CE, a whopping 400-plus years of Confucian-infused governance, longer than most modern superpowers have been around. The Han emperors were like those late-blooming fans who finally catch on to a trend everyone else already knows about. They took Confucius's ideas and, like a master chef, cooked them into the staple diet of Chinese political and educational systems. The Confucian classics became the curriculum of choice, turning imperial schools into the Ivy Leagues of their time. If you wanted to climb the bureaucratic ladder, you'd better know your Analects like the back of your scroll. The civil service exams, established later, became the ultimate test of one's Confucian chops, ensuring that those who governed were well versed in the sage's teachings. Here's the irony that history loves. During his lifetime, Confucius couldn't catch a break from the political elite, yet posthumously, his ideas became the blueprint for governance. It's like seeing your art project in a museum after failing art class. The Han Dynasty essentially elevated Confucius to a quasi-saintly status, cementing his philosophies as the moral compass of the empire. This wasn't just a nod to his wisdom. It was a strategic move to unify a vast and culturally diverse China under a single set of values. Confucianism provided the ideological glue that held the empire together, much like a well-crafted constitution. Economically, Confucianism also offered a vision that was both practical and progressive. Confucius's call for fair taxation and ethical leadership resonated in the Han's efforts to stabilize an economy that had seen its fair share of turmoil. By promoting agricultural development and encouraging equitable distribution, the Han emperors aimed to create a sustainable economic model, one that valued long-term stability over short-term gains. The result, an agricultural boom that supported a population explosion from 20 million to over 60 million by the end of the dynasty. Talk about a flourishing empire. But let's not get too misty-eyed about this Confucian renaissance. While Confucianism did promote a merit-based bureaucracy, it also reinforced a rigid social hierarchy and patriarchal values. The noble ideal of filial piety, for instance, became a double-edged sword, encouraging respect and responsibility within families, but also entrenching a system where elders wielded unquestioned authority. Women, particularly, found themselves tethered to roles that Confucian orthodoxy prescribed, with little room for deviation. This was a society where the phrase, "know your place," was less a suggestion and more a commandment. So, what does this all mean for the legacy of Confucius? Well, it's a classic tale of posthumous vindication. His life may have been a series of frustrations and philosophical roadblocks, but his ideas outlived him by millennia, shaping not just China, but also influencing neighboring cultures in Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. Confucius's teachings became a sort of philosophical export, spreading like an ancient brand of ethical diplomacy. The man who couldn't land a stable job in his own time ended up with one of the most enduring careers in history, his teachings still echoing in today's classrooms and debates on morality. In the grand tapestry of history, Confucius stands as a reminder that the true measure of success isn't always immediate. Sometimes it's the seed planted in rocky soil that grows into the mightiest tree. His life story underscores the power of ideas to transcend their origins, to be embraced and adapted by future generations in ways their creator could scarcely have imagined. Confucianism's journey from philosophical outsider to institutional centerpiece is a testament to the enduring power of a vision rooted in virtue, ethics, and the quest for a harmonious society. As we close the book on Confucius's tale, we're left with this: a philosopher whose teachings survived the test of time, becoming the bedrock of one of history's most influential civilizations. In a world where power often overshadows principle, Confucius reminds us that wisdom, though it may be slow to catch on, can ultimately shape the course of history. So the next time you find yourself pondering life's big questions, spare a thought for the sage from Lu, whose musings on morality continue to resonate, engaging minds and inspiring hearts across the ages. If you thought your teenage years were dramatic, meet Gaius Octavius, the kid who went from high school nobody to heir of the world's most powerful man. Born in 63 BCE, Octavius didn't exactly have future ruler of Rome stamped on his birth certificate. He hailed from the plebeian side of Roman society, which in the brutal social hierarchy of Rome was about as glamorous as being the third cousin at a family reunion. No one really wants to attend. His dad, Gaius Octavius, was a local bigwig in the Roman political scene, but nothing to write home about if you were ranking power players of the time. But here's where the plot thickens. Octavius had a secret weapon. His mom, Asia, was the niece of none other than Julius Caesar himself. That's like having an uncle who's both a rock star and a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Caesar was the man everyone wanted to have on speed dial, and young Octavius was already in his good books before he even hit his awkward teenage years. Talk about winning the genetic lottery. Now, Octavius wasn't just some wide-eyed kid riding on coattails. The boy had brains. Picture a Roman chess master who was somehow always 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Sure, he had the family connections, But he also realized early on that being Caesar's heir wasn't just about the power. There was an empire's worth of responsibility, political backstabbing, and frankly, a high risk of ending up on the wrong side of a dagger. At the ripe old age of 12, Octavius delivered the funeral oration for his grandmother, Julia, Caesar's sister. A bit of public speaking at that age is like being handed the mic at the Oscars without any rehearsal. He nailed it. The kid had charisma, and more importantly, he got noticed by Caesar. It's a bit like wowing the CEO at the company picnic. By 18, when most of us are figuring out life beyond mom's basement, Octavius was thrust into Rome's chaotic political spotlight. Here's where things get spicy. In 44 BCE, Julius Caesar took a permanent sabbatical from life, courtesy of the Ides of March, and a group of senators who thought stabbing was a viable form of political debate. With Caesar gone, Rome was like a soap opera on steroids. Nobody knew who would take the top job, and everyone was eyeing that position like it was the last slice of pizza at a frat party. Enter Octavius, who soon found out that Uncle Julius had named him his heir. Yes, the will reading was a plot twist worthy of a Netflix series. Imagine the gasps when an 18-year-old was declared the next big thing in Roman politics. It was a move that left many scratching their heads or sharpening their knives. But Octavius was no mere pawn in a political chess game. He was more like the kid who shows up with his own chessboard and a strategy that makes everyone else look like they're playing checkers. He quickly seized control of Caesar's legions and assets, a bold move that showed he was not here to play nice. Instead of being brushed aside as a youthful anomaly, Octavius started building a power base faster than you could say, Senatus Populusque Romanus. And let's not forget the charm offensive. Octavius knew that in politics, as in life, it's not just what you know, but who you know. He cozied up to key players, secured alliances, and even managed to get Mark Antony, one of Caesar's top generals and a man who had his own eyes on the prize, to begrudgingly see him as a contender. The young man had a knack for turning potential enemies into allies, or at least less enthusiastic enemies. What was truly jaw-dropping was his ability to navigate the political minefield of Rome with the deftness of a cat burglar. Octavius knew when to flex muscle and when to play the humble heir. The Senate, initially skeptical, was wooed by his respectful demeanor and apparent willingness to play by the rules. But make no mistake, Octavius was rewriting those rules, one cunning move at a time. Amidst all this political chess-playing, let's not ignore the comedic undertones. Here was a teenager negotiating with seasoned generals and seasoned politicians who probably thought he'd be more interested in toga parties than power struggles. Yet, Octavius managed to keep a straight face while convincing the Roman elite that he was the man for the job. It's a testament to his savvy, and perhaps a nod to the absurdity of Roman politics, where the unexpected was just a Tuesday. So there we have young Octavius, the unlikely heir who played his cards with a wisdom beyond his years, a testament to both his cunning and the unpredictable winds of fortune. As we delve deeper into his rise, remember this: Augustus wasn't just a title he earned. It was a persona he crafted, starting from his improbable teenage debut. But Octavius was just warming up. The air in Rome post-Caesar was thicker than a frat party punch bowl. With the Republic in chaos, factions sprang up like mushrooms after rain, each with its own idea of who should be running the show. Octavian, young as he was, had a knack for reading the room, or in this case, the entire Roman political theatre. Now, you might think having Julius Caesar as your uncle would make life a breeze. You know, instant respect, free entry to all the cool patrician parties. But nope, it was more like wearing a "kick me" sign in the gladiator arena. Octavian found himself juggling alliances like a circus performer with a penchant for drama. And that's where his partnership with Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus comes in. Cue the second triumvirate, a power trio that make any rock band jealous, or at least wary. Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man, was a force of nature, known for his military prowess and a flair for the dramatic. His speeches could rally soldiers like nobody's business, And he had a knack for turning funerals into political rallies. Just ask the crowd at Caesar's funeral. Antony was the rock star of Roman politics, and for Octavian, teaming up with him was like opening for the Beatles. Then there was Lepidus, the third wheel of this political tricycle. He had military chops and a pile of cash, but let's be real, he was the Ringo star of the group, important, but not quite the headliner. In November 43 BCE, the trio made it official, drafting the Lex Tiscia, which legalized the Second Triumvirate. This was no ordinary get-together. It was a political Avengers assemble, with each member bringing a unique superpower to the table. But instead of fighting Thanos, they were out to crush the Senate's standing army and hunt down Julius Caesar's assassins. Their mission, to restore order, or at least their version of it, to the Roman Republic. This wasn't your typical alliance built on trust and mutual respect. More like a temporary ceasefire between three guys who'd sooner stab each other in the back than share a drink. Their first order of business, the proscriptions, a dark chapter that makes the Red Wedding look like a tea party. They issued a hit list, targeting senators and equestrians who had opposed them. It was a bloody affair, with 300 senators and 2,000 knights meeting untimely ends. Even Cicero, the famed orator who probably thought he was safe behind his eloquence, ended up with his head and hands decorating the rostra in the forum. A gruesome reminder that in Rome, words could be as deadly as swords. Octavian, despite his youth, understood the brutal calculus of power. The proscriptions were not just about eliminating enemies, they were also a financial windfall. Confiscated estates and wealth filled the triumvirate's war chest, funding their military campaigns and cementing their control. It's a stark reminder that in Rome, as in life, money talked, and blood was often the currency of choice. The triumvirate then set their sights on the eastern provinces, where Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, were fortifying their positions. The ensuing Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE was a showdown of epic proportions. It was Antony and Octavian versus the so-called liberators, a clash that would decide the fate of the Republic. Despite Octavian falling ill and missing the first battle, perhaps a case of strategic napping, Antony's forces delivered a decisive blow. In the second round, even Octavian's luck seemed to have turned, with Brutus forced to fall on his sword. It was a victory that cemented the triumvirate's power, but also a sign that sleeping through conflicts could be part of a winning strategy. Now, you'd think after such a victory, the triumvirate would ride off into the sunset, their friendship stronger than ever. But this is Rome, where alliances are as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Antony, ever the romantic, headed east to bask in the spoils of war and the arms of Cleopatra. Meanwhile, Octavian stayed in Rome, portraying himself as the staunch defender of traditional Roman values, a move as calculated as it was effective. The cracks were beginning to show. Lepidus was sidelined, reduced to a footnote in the history of the triumvirate. His army was absorbed by Octavian, who was quickly becoming the power broker in this political ménage à trois. Antony in Egypt was living the high life, but back in Rome, Octavian was busy weaving a narrative that painted Antony as a traitor living in the lap of luxury with Cleopatra, a foreign queen. In Roman eyes, that was almost as scandalous as wearing socks with sandals. Octavian knew the power of propaganda. With a flair that would make modern spin doctors proud, he launched a campaign against Antony, casting him as the villain in this Roman soap opera. It wasn't just about words, though. Octavian backed his rhetoric with action. He secured his position by strengthening ties with the Senate and marrying Scribonia, a politically strategic union that brought him closer to Pompey's faction. The fact that he later divorced her for Livia, a woman who had her own set of impressive connections, only underscores Octavian's knack for making personal relationships serve political ends. By now, Octavian was more than just a political player. He was a maestro conducting a symphony of alliances and rivalries. His knack for turning adversaries into allies, and sometimes allies into enemies, was nothing short of Machiavellian. He had the Senate eating out of his hand, all while keeping a keen eye on Antony's moves in the east. Octavian's ability to juggle the demands of power while maintaining an image of the dutiful Roman was a testament to both his political acumen and his understanding of human nature. As Rome braced for the inevitable showdown between Octavian and Antony, the stage was set for a clash that would redefine the Republic. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The drama of Octavian's rise is far from over, and the road to becoming Augustus is littered with enough intrigue and treachery to fill a season of the most gripping historical drama. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the saga of Rome's first emperor, where the stakes are about to get even higher and the backstabbing even sharper. As the Roman political stew simmered, ready to boil over, Octavian was already orchestrating the grand finale of his symphonic rise to power. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown. Octavian versus Mark Antony, a clash as inevitable as rain on a parade. And believe me, this wasn't just any parade. It was a spectacle worthy of the ages, with the Battle of Actium as its centerpiece in 31 BCE. Now, let's talk about Actium. Picture the Adriatic Sea, where Octavian and Antony's forces would soon tango in a naval skirmish that would decide the fate of the Roman world. But before you get swept up in visions of epic sea battles a la Hollywood, let's ground this in reality and a bit of humor. The Battle of Actium wasn't a glittering, swashbuckling spectacle. It was more like a strategic chess match played out on water. Less Pirates of the Caribbean and more who can outlast whom in choppy seas. First, the background. By 32 BCE, the political tension between Octavian and Antony had reached boiling point. Antony, with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt at his side, was living it up in Alexandria. Their relationship was the tabloid sensation of the ancient world, and Octavian was having none of it. To him, Antony was not just a rival, but a defector, choosing an exotic queen over his Roman roots. Octavian spun this narrative with the skill of a modern PR genius, painting Antony as a man who'd gone soft amid the Egyptian luxury, while he himself was the stalwart defender of Roman traditions. Strategically, Octavian had the upper hand. He controlled the western Mediterranean, thanks to his political maneuvering and a navy as well-oiled as a Roman chariot. Agrippa, Octavian's right-hand man and naval commander, was crucial to this setup. A tactical mastermind, Agrippa was the unsung hero who made sure Octavian's fleet was ready for the big dance. By 31 BCE, Octavian had marshaled around 400 ships and 80,000 infantry. Talk about bringing a big stick to a knife fight. Meanwhile, Antony's forces weren't exactly shabby. With around 500 ships and 70,000 infantry, plus Cleopatra's support and her Egyptian fleet, Antony's armada was formidable. However, there was a catch. Antony's ships were massive, ponderous behemoths designed more for intimidation than agility. Think of them as the ancient world's version of muscle cars, impressive to look at, but not exactly nimble. Enter the Battle of Actium on September 2, 31 BCE, a day that would change everything. Octavian's forces, commanded by Agrippa, executed a classic naval pincer movement, encircling Antony's fleet. The smaller, more agile ships of Octavian's navy sliced through the water with ease, while Antony's larger vessels struggled to keep up. The battle raged on, and the strategic brilliance of Agrippa shone like a beacon. Antony, realizing the tide was turning against him, literally made a fateful decision. He saw an opening, and with Cleopatra's fleet already retreating, decided to make a break for it. It was a moment of desperation, perhaps fueled by love or simply the desire to fight another day. He and Cleopatra fled the scene, leaving his forces to fend for themselves. This move has been romanticized over the centuries, but let's be real. It was more about survival than star-crossed romance. With Antony's departure, the battle swiftly concluded in favor of Octavian. His troops quickly mopped up the remaining resistance, and just like that, the future of Rome was sealed. The costs were staggering, with thousands of lives lost and ships sunk, but the victory was decisive. Octavian had not only won the battle, but had set the stage for becoming Rome's unchallenged ruler. In the aftermath of Actium, Octavian's propaganda machine went into overdrive. The defeat of Antony and Cleopatra was spun as a triumph of Roman virtue over exotic decadence. Cleopatra, once seen as a powerful ally, was now recast in the Roman imagination as the seductive foreign queen who led Antony astray. Octavian returned to Rome not just as a military victor, but as a savior of Roman values, a narrative he would skillfully exploit to secure his power. But let's not forget the economic undercurrents of this grand drama. The spoils of victory were immense. With Egypt under his control, Octavian had access to the grain supplies that fed Rome's ever-hungry populace. This economic boon was as crucial as any military triumph. It ensured not only that Rome's bellies were full, but also that Octavian's coffers were flush with cash, an essential ingredient in the recipe for maintaining power. Back in Rome, Octavian's triumph was celebrated with all the pomp and circumstance of a blockbuster premiere. He was hailed as the hero who had preserved Rome from the clutches of Eastern corruption. The Senate, keen to stay on the winning side, lavished honors upon him, paving the way for his transformation from Octavian to Augustus, Rome's first emperor. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That's a tale for another day. What we can say is that the Battle of Actium was more than just a clash of ships and strategies. It was the turning point that allowed Octavian to consolidate his power and reshape Rome's future. The romance of Antony and Cleopatra, the naval maneuvers, the political machinations, all of it contributed to the legend. Yet beneath the surface, it was the cold, hard realities of power, military might, propaganda, and economic control that determined the outcome. As we pause here, remember that history is often a blend of myth and reality. The story of Octavian's rise is no exception. While the legends captivate us, it's the gritty details that reveal the true dynamics at play. The road from Octavian to Augustus was paved with strategic brilliance, a bit of luck, and more than a few calculated gambles. And as any good strategist knows, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. But in Octavian's case, he was both, and then some. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the saga of Rome's first emperor, where the stakes are ever higher and the drama even juicier. Octavian had skillfully played his hand, transforming the Roman political landscape into his very own chessboard. But the game was far from over. It was time for the piece de resistance. Rebranding himself as Augustus, the benevolent leader, rather than a power-hungry dictator. Talk about ambitious marketing. First off, Octavian faced the daunting task of convincing an empire weary of autocrats that he wasn't just another Caesar in a toga. His slogan, "First among equals," it was a clever bit of spin, suggesting that while he might be Rome's top dog, he was still one of them, just with a fancier collar. This was the original "I'm just like you" campaign, minus the social media influencers. To pull off this transformation, Octavian knew he had to work with the Senate, not against them. He started by restoring some powers to the Senate and the traditional magistrates, all while holding onto the real levers of control. This wasn't so much sharing power as it was lending out the remote control with the batteries taken out. In 27 BCE, he made a grand show of handing back his extraordinary powers to the Senate and people of Rome, an act that was as genuine as a reality TV apology. The Senate, in a display of gratitude, or perhaps sheer relief, bestowed upon him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. And just like that, Octavian was no more. Augustus had arrived on the scene, cloaked in respectability and a dash of divine favor. Augustus also understood the power of symbolism. He embarked on an ambitious building program, transforming Rome from a city of brick to one of marble. This was more than just urban beautification. It was a statement. Rome was the capital of a world empire, and it would look the part. The costs, of course, were astronomical, but when you're Rome's CEO with access to Egypt's treasuries, you can afford to splurge on a few architectural upgrades. Augustus funded massive projects like the Forum of Augustus and the Altar of Peace, monuments that shouted stability and prosperity even louder than a modern political campaign ad. But Augustus didn't stop at bricks and mortar. He was a maestro of propaganda, painting a picture of his reign as a golden age of peace, the Pax Romana. Never mind that this peace was maintained by a standing army of over 300,000 soldiers stationed across the empire, ready to crush any dissent like a boot on an errant ant. The image of peace, however, was crucial. It reassured the Roman people and placated the Senate, who were all too aware of the alternative, a return to the chaos of civil war. Behind the scenes, Augustus was also a master of personal branding, crafting an image of moral uprightness and familial devotion. He enacted social reforms to promote family values, encouraging marriage and childbearing with tax incentives. Augustus knew that a stable society was one that could keep producing little Romans to fill the legions and the tax registers. His own family life, however, was a soap opera that would make the Kardashians look downright tame. His daughter, Julia, was famous for her scandalous lifestyle, which was the talk of Rome. Augustus, in a move that would be front-page tabloid news today, exiled her for her indiscretions, proving that not even family was exempt from his moral code. Let's not forget Augustus' knack for PR. He was the ancient world's answer to a modern-day spin doctor, using poets like Virgil to craft the narrative of his reign. The Aeneid wasn't just epic poetry. It was state-sponsored propaganda, casting Augustus as the heir of Aeneas, a hero whose divine mission was to found Rome. It was a tale that linked Augustus directly to the gods and Rome's mythic past, a masterstroke in public relations that would have any marketing exec nodding in approval. Augustus also had a flair for public spectacles. Gladiatorial games, chariot races, and lavish feasts were all part of the Augustan package. These events weren't just about entertainment. They were a way to keep the populace engaged and distracted. After all, a well-fed and entertained public is less likely to question the status quo. Augustus knew that the key to maintaining power was to give the people what they wanted, and he delivered time and again. Amidst all this political theatre, Augustus was a man of quirks. He was known to be a bit of a neat freak, preferring his toga spotless and his hair perfectly arranged. He also had a peculiar habit of composing his speeches in advance, then practicing them with the help of a mirror. It's said that he once recited a speech to his reflection for several days, honing his delivery until it was as sharp as a Roman gladius. This attention to detail extended to his diet as well. Augustus was a frugal eater, often opting for simple meals of bread, cheese, and figs, which might explain why he lived to the ripe old age of 75, a remarkable feat at a time when life expectancy was closer to 35. Yet, for all his personal idiosyncrasies, Augustus was acutely aware of the need to maintain a public facade of strength and stability. He was the embodiment of the Roman ideal, a leader who appeared to be above the fray of politics, even as he orchestrated every move. His ability to balance the image of a humble servant of the Republic with the reality of supreme power was nothing short of remarkable. Augustus had effectively rewritten the rules of Roman politics, creating a system that bore the trappings of republicanism while operating as a de facto monarchy. As Augustus' reign continued, he faced the inevitable challenge of succession, a tricky business in a world where power was often transferred by the sword rather than the law. Augustus had no sons, only a string of potential heirs snuffed out by illness or intrigue. His eventual choice fell on Tiberius, his stepson, a decision that would have significant implications for Rome's future. But that's a story for another time. In the end, Augustus' genius lay in his ability to cloak his absolute authority in the veneers of tradition and republicanism. He was, as many historians have noted, a master of the art of the possible. By the time of his death in 14 CE, Augustus had transformed Rome from a fractious republic into a stable empire, a legacy that would endure for centuries. His reign marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, a transition so seamless that it's easy to forget just how radical a departure it was from the Roman past. Augustus managed to convince the Roman world that he was not a king, even as he wielded the power of one. It was a feat of political acrobatics that would have made even the most seasoned spin doctors envious. As we look back on his life and legacy, it's clear that Augustus was more than just a ruler. He was a visionary who reshaped the Roman world in his image, setting the stage for the empire's enduring legacy. And as we pause in this unfolding drama, remember that the tale of Augustus is far from over. The story of Rome's first emperor is a saga of power, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of legacy, a narrative that continues to captivate us with its blend of myth and reality. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this epic saga, where the stakes get even higher and the intrigue even deeper. As we continue the saga of Augustus, let's delve into the legacy he left behind, a legacy that wasn't just an afterthought, but a well-crafted masterpiece of political theatre and strategic genius. Augustus didn't just ride the wave of history. He orchestrated it, turning Rome from a republic quaking under the weight of its own ambitions into an empire that would dominate the ancient world for centuries. How did he pull off this transformation? By mastering the delicate art of spin and savvy statecraft. First, let's talk about the Roman Empire, Augustus, piece de résistance. He knew that to build an enduring empire, you needed more than just military might. You needed a narrative that people could rally behind. Enter the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability that lasted over 200 years. Augustus wasn't shy about taking credit for this golden era, despite the fact that it was maintained with a hefty dose of military pressure. His empire stretched from Spain to Syria, a colossal expanse of about 7 million square miles, and Augustus made sure every corner of it knew who was in charge. But Augustus' true genius lay in his ability to keep this sprawling domain glued together. Imagine managing an empire with a population hovering around 70 million, all with their own languages, cultures, and simmering resentments. Augustus' solution: a mix of local autonomy and centralized control, a balancing act that would make a tightrope walker sweat. He installed loyalists and family members in key positions, ensuring that while the provinces had a degree of self-governance, the real power remained with him. It was governance by proxy, with Augustus pulling the strings from Rome like a master puppeteer. Economically, Augustus was no slouch either. He understood that an empire runs on its stomach and its treasury. He reformed the tax system to ensure a steady flow of revenue, a move that both filled Roman coffers and helped maintain the loyalty of the provinces. The introduction of a census every 5 years allowed for more efficient tax collection, a precursor to modern bureaucracy. Augustus wasn't just collecting taxes. He was building the infrastructure of empire, brick by administrative brick. Yet, for all his successes, Augustus wasn't immune to failure. His attempts to expand Rome's borders met with mixed results. The infamous disaster in the Teutoburg forest in 9 CE, where 3 Roman legions were wiped out by Germanic tribes, was a stinging reminder that Rome's power had its limits. Augustus, ever the pragmatist, pulled back from further expansion in Germania, recognizing that some battles weren't worth the cost. It was a rare moment of restraint in a world where conquest was the currency of power. Augustus also faced personal challenges. His family life was a soap opera of scandal and intrigue, with his daughter Julia's indiscretions forcing him into public damage control. Augustus' succession plans were a revolving door of potential heirs, many of whom met untimely ends. His eventual choice, Tiberius, was more a matter of necessity than preference, a testament to the unpredictable nature of dynastic politics. Augustus' struggle to secure a stable succession highlights a fundamental truth: even the most powerful ruler can't control everything. Now, let's tackle the myths. Augustus knew the value of a good story and wasn't above crafting a few of his own. He cultivated the image of a benevolent leader, a man of the people who had restored Rome to its former glory. The reality was more complex. Augustus' rule was backed by a formidable military presence, and dissent was often met with swift and severe consequences. His regime was as much about maintaining order through force as it was about governance. Yet the myths endured. Augustus, reign became the benchmark against which all future emperors would be measured. His ability to blend traditional Roman values with the demands of empire created a template that would guide Rome for generations. The legend of Augustus as the father of the empire was as much his creation as his conquests. In reflecting on Augustus' legacy, it's crucial to acknowledge both the romance and the reality. He was a master of image management, a leader who understood that perception could be as powerful as the sword. Augustus' story is a masterclass in power politics, a lesson in how to navigate the treacherous waters of ambition and authority. His ability to adapt, to learn from failure, and to craft a narrative that resonated with his people ensured that his name would echo through history. Augustus' impact was profound. He established a political system that allowed Rome to flourish for centuries, laying the groundwork for an empire that would influence the world long after its fall. His reign marked the transition from a republic to an imperial power, a shift that would define Western civilization. Augustus didn't just rule an empire, he shaped the course of history, leaving behind a legacy that would be studied and debated for millennia. As we conclude this journey through the life and times of Rome's first emperor, remember that Augustus was more than just a figurehead. He was a visionary, a strategist, and a statesman who understood the complex interplay of power, politics, and perception. His legacy is a reminder that history is both a story and a lesson, a tapestry of triumphs and trials that continues to inspire and instruct. In the end, Augustus' greatest achievement wasn't just the empire he built, but the enduring legacy he left behind, a legacy that reminds us of the power of leadership, the art of spin, and the timeless dance of myths and reality. As we look back on his life, we see not just a ruler, but a legend, a man whose story is as compelling today as it was 2,000 years ago. And that, my friends, is the true measure of a legacy worth remembering.